Hello, everyone. A very good evening and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep. Welcome back to our discussion on international relations. Yesterday was the first class for this batch, and we had started with few basic introductory concepts in international relations. After discussing these basic concepts, we had started with India and its neighborhood, that is the South Asia region. And we began with the Himalayan neighbors of India, starting with Nepal. We even gave a introduction to India-Nepal relations. We had understood the strategic location of Nepal. We spoke about the geographical features of Nepal, the physical, geographical, and human geographical features, and what impact does it have on Nepal's geopolitics. So today, let's continue the discussion from here. Let's talk about the basis of India-Nepal relations. Let's understand what kind of close relations does India share with Nepal. We'll also study the background. We shall talk about the political relations, the economic, security, and strategic relations, along with other areas of cooperation. So, if you look at Nepal on this map, I told you that Nepal is a landlocked country, which means Nepal has a limitation. It faces a major economic limitation because of its constrained geography. It is sandwiched between two large Asian powers, that is India and China, and it does not have direct access to the sea. So, this is where India plays a very important role in Nepal's economy. India, being a traditional partner and a close friend of Nepal, we have allowed Nepal to access the sea via Indian territory. Essentially, India has given sea access. We have allowed Nepali goods to transit via India. So, this is a lifeline that India has provided to Nepal. We have allowed Nepali traders to access the seaports of India located on the east coast of India. Ports such as the Kolkata Haldia port, the Paradip port, Vishakhapatnam. These strategic ports of India have been opened for Nepal, and that is how Nepal trades with the rest of the world. So it basically means that Nepal has a great deal of economic dependency on India because its external trade, foreign trade, largely passes through India. Its imports and exports are carried via Indian territory. So, this transit access we have given, which allows Nepal to access the seaports, is crucial for Nepal's economy. This is a key point you have to remember. Now, let me explain the uniqueness of this relationship. Apart from this economic dependency of Nepal, the two countries have established a system of open borders in order to further the deep rooted people to people relations. If you guys remember, yesterday I had explained the deep rooted people to people relations between India and Nepal. We spoke about the historical civilizational links between the two sides. We understood the connection offered through Hinduism and Buddhism, which connects the people of the two countries. There are several important pilgrimage sites in Nepal which are crucial for Indians and vice versa. We also spoke about the Madesi people and how they share marital links or familial links in the border villages of UP and Bihar. The Madhes people from the Terai region, the Terai belt of Nepal, they marry into Indian families across the border. So they share familial links or marital links, which binds Indian families in UP and Bihar with Nepali families in the Terai region. So that is the deep rooted people to people relationship that exists between the two countries. We also allow Nepali students and workers to come to India to study and to find livelihood opportunities. So across India, in several important cities, in several important universities and colleges, you will find that Nepali students will be enrolled. Nepali students, they're eligible for several exams in India, even government exams. They can compete even in UPSC exams, right? There is an entire contingent in the Indian Army, the Gorkha Regiment, which preferentially recruits Nepali Gorkhas. So that is the close people to people relationship that we share. In fact, Nepal's economy is very small. There aren't enough resources and opportunities in Nepal. So Nepali students, workers, they depend on India. Nepali traders, they depend on India. So it is essential to allow the free movement of people and goods between the two countries in order to sustain this close relationship. Do you agree? If we are sharing such historical links, and if the country has such a great deal of economic dependency on our country, then to further facilitate the relationship, we have to provide free movement for people and goods across the border. That is what will cement the relationship. And that is exactly what India has done by providing for open borders between the two countries. What do you mean by open borders? It means we do not have hard border controls. There are no hard border controls along the India-Nepal border. It means there is no requirement of a visa, no immigration and security checks. There are no hard security measures. That is across the border. If Nepali people cross over to India, or if Nepali goods and trucks enter India, there are no hard security measures, right? The border guarding troops and the security forces, they don't impose very strict restrictions. They don't conduct very serious security checks here. And the visa immigration norms are very relaxed and kept open. So Indians can enter Nepal without a visa, right? With just a identification document. It need not even be your passport, right? With just a government issued ID, you can enter Nepal. Similarly, Nepalis can enter India without a visa. So such a relaxed border where you do not have hard border controls is called an open border. In many ways, it is similar to the Schengen zone of European Union. If any of you have traveled to Nepal or to a Schengen country in Europe, you'll understand what I'm talking about, right? Let's say you want to carry out a tourist visit to European countries. You need not sit and apply for individual visas for every European country. You get the common Schengen visa. It will give you automatic access to all the Schengen countries which are part of European Union. Within the EU, the member countries of EU and their citizens, they don't need visa to move from one country to another. Now, let's say, for example, a French citizen, let's say he wishes to go to Germany to study, or a French national wants to go to Austria to work. There are no border controls between these countries as they are part of the Schengen zone. So the citizens of European Union, they can move from one country to another, one member country to another without border checks, without the need for a visa. Is that clear? They can reside in another country and they almost exercise the same rights as the citizens of that country. Essentially, they are given national treatment in the other country. They enjoy almost the same privileges as that of the citizen of that country. So when non-EU residents, non-EU citizens like Indians, right, if they want to travel across EU countries, you just have to get the Schengen visa. That will give you access to all EU countries. Understood? So similarly, we have created an open border system where we have no hard border controls, no strict security measures, relaxed visa immigration norms, and there is no need for a visa at all. So this allows the free movement of Indians and Nepalis to both the countries. It's a reciprocal arrangement. It's not a one-sided arrangement. Because please remember, diplomacy is always about reciprocity. In the world of international relations, you always give something and get something in return. It's not a one-sided affair. So both Indians and Nepalis enjoy this advantage where they can move to the other side, settle down, run their businesses, even if required, buy property, apply for jobs, study in the other country. So all such privileges are extended, which means that they are eligible for national treatment. Is that clear? In fact, it's because of this unique nature of the relationship that many former diplomats and strategic experts, they have a joke about India-Nepal relations. They say that India-Nepal relations are like roti beti ke sambandh. It's a very popular reference. It's a joking reference to define Nepal's dependency on India. Because Nepal is dependent on India for roti. Roti here means bread, which means livelihood. It's a reference to livelihood. Since Nepali livelihood is dependent on the Indian economy, right? They have a dependence on India. So that is what the roti refers to, right? They earn their bread, they earn their livelihood by depending on India. And they also depend on India for marriages. The term beti here refers to the marital links. The marital links between Nepalis and Indians, particularly how Madhesi families marry into Indian families in UP and Bihar. So jokingly, experts and former diplomats, they refer to the relationship as roti beti ke sambandh. Right? It shows Nepal's dependency on India for the livelihood of the people, for Nepal's economy, and also for marital and familial relations. So this close relationship has been founded on the basis of a treaty, which is the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Please make a note of this point. In 1950, after independence, India-Nepal cemented a close relationship by signing the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. It is under this treaty that they have established the system of open borders. It is under this treaty that they have extended national treatment to citizens of both the countries. So essentially, Nepali citizens enjoy a lot of privileges in India, almost equivalent to that of Indian citizens, except for right to vote and few other constitutional rights and privileges. Most of the other advantages are available to Nepali citizens in India. As I told you, the Indian Army has a dedicated regiment, the Gorkha Regiment, where Nepali Gorkhas are recruited preferentially. Is that clear? Nepali citizens are eligible for government exams in India, including your UPSC exams. Got it? They can apply for jobs in India, reside in India, study in India, make a livelihood in India, and send the money back to their families in Nepal. Because even the currency, the Indian rupee, is pegged to the Nepali currency, to the Nepali rupee. There is very close interlinkages between our economy. The Indian rupee is valid in Nepal, right? The Indian rupee is not valid anywhere else. Outside of India, Indian rupee is pretty much useless because it's not fully convertible, right? It's only partially convertible. You would have studied that in Indian economy. Whereas in Nepal, since Nepal's currency has been pegged to the Indian rupee, our currency is fully convertible. It can be used for transactions in Nepal. Even the UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, the digital payment gateway, has been extended to Nepal, and digital transactions have been enabled between the two countries. So that is the extent of close relations that have been built. And the foundation of this relationship is the 1950 treaty. This treaty is extremely important because even today, the topic is in news. There are some concerns regarding the treaty. Both India and Nepal have concerns regarding the treaty, especially security concerns. Since it provides for an open border, right? Since the security measures are relaxed, it can lead to security problems. It can increase the chances of infiltration. It could enable organized crime. such as drug trafficking, arms trafficking. So criminals and even terrorists from hostile countries can sneak across the border because of the system of open borders. In fact, along this border, we have a major border security problem. There are several criminal activities that are rampant. Then there are chances of illegal infiltration taking place. Hostile foreign entities, terrorists could sneak through the border. So both sides have often expressed this concern, but they still retain the system of open borders because that is what defines the relationship. See, later we will take a look at the security issues. So then I've seen that many students ask the same question. In other classes, I've seen many students have the same doubt that why do we have open borders even now if we have security problems? If you're not happy with the arrangement, why not shut the open border? Right? Why not implement hard border controls? That is a suggestion that many students provide. But let me tell you why open borders cannot be removed easily with Nepal. Please understand, this is the very foundation of the relationship. If you end the system of open borders just because there are some security problems, then it is going to harm the deep-rooted cultural people-to-people relations. What defines our relationship is the civilizational relationship, the cultural ties we have, the close people-to-people connection that we have. So just because of border security issues, if we shut the open border, it will derail our relationship. It is going to hit the very foundation of the relationship. So protecting the system of open borders is much larger than the security issue. The security issues are there. Yes, it is a concern, but you can deal with them with better border security, better border management. By deploying better surveillance, you can tackle the security threats. But because of the security problems, if you shut the open border, it is going to hit the very foundation of this relationship. It's a very special relationship that we share. Please note down that we do not have open borders with any other country except for Nepal. So that is a defining aspect, a unique aspect of this relationship. So that is the reason why the Indian government especially has worked hard to protect the system of open borders. In fact, under the treaty, there are very strict restrictions on the border guarding force as well. They can't carry heavy weaponry and they can't open fire. They can't shoot. They can't deploy heavy weaponry along the border, right? The security forces, the border guarding forces and armed forces on both the sides, they are prohibited, restricted through the treaty from deploying heavy weaponry and from opening fire. That is a restriction which has been placed, which allows for the free movement of people and goods and trucks. So this defines the cultural economic relations. And that's the reason why the system of open borders has to be protected. Is that clear? Now, can you let me know which is the border guarding force from India? Do you know which security force of India is responsible to guard and protect the sensitive border with Nepal? Some are saying BSF, ITBP, SSB, Assam Rifles, CRPF. Very few students have got it right. The correct answer is SSB, the Sashastra Seema Bal, which is a central armed police force under the Ministry of Home Affairs. This paramilitary force of India, this border guarding force of India, is the designated force to protect the India-Nepal border, the Sashastra Seema Bal. Is that clear? So that's an important fact for your prelims. So now that you have understood the strategic location and the uniqueness of the relationship, let us quickly examine the political relations between the two countries. Let's talk about the history, the background quickly, and talk about the present day relations between India and Nepal. As I told you yesterday, Nepal was a monarchy and a theological state until recently. Nepal was a kingdom. It was not a democracy, not a republican state, and it was not a secular state. It was the only Hindu state in the world until recently. But due to various internal problems and challenges, in 2006, Nepal transitioned to a secular democratic republic. So we have seen this political transition, this constitutional transition happen in Nepal. It was a theological monarchy from 1947 till 2006, but later it transitioned to a secular state and a democratic republican state. Is that clear? Now let's see how the relations developed between India and Nepal after independence. Now that you know the civilizational historical links, let's talk about post independence relations. Let's see how the relations developed from 1947 till 1975. I call this phase 1 of India Nepal relations. During this period, both the countries shared very cordial relations. There was a very high degree of trust in the relationship. Both the countries trusted each other. We had complete faith in each other, and both the countries were very, very close to each other. In fact, India even cultivated Nepal as a buffer state against any security threats. This was a strategic policy of the then Nehru government. India cultivated the Himalayan countries of Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan as buffer states against any threats from the north, that is, from China. Yes, I told Sikkim as well. It is not wrong because Sikkim was not a part of India until 1975. It was just a protectorate state. It was an independent kingdom, just like Nepal and Bhutan. So post India's independence, we had these three Himalayan kingdoms, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan. So to build a close security relationship with them and to set them up as buffers to protect India's security interests, India cultivated a close security-based strategic relationship with these Himalayan kingdoms. Is that clear? Buffer is like a cushion. Like, for example, the Food Corporation of India maintains a buffer stock. What do you mean by that? A buffer stock is additional stock. Additional stock of food grains are maintained by the FCI. So if there is any emergency in the food market, if there's a shortage of food supply, FCI will release food grains from the buffer stock to stabilize the prices. So the buffer stock is acting like a cushion for the Food Corporation of India to manage the prices of food grains. Similarly, in geopolitics, large countries often develop small countries as their buffer states. They are present on the exterior boundaries of this country and they act like a cushion. They absorb any external impact. Since India perceived a major threat from China, especially with the annexation of Tibet in 1950 and the aggressive rise of China, right? India was concerned. By 1948 itself, when the modern China was established, that is PRC, when the People's Republic of China was established after the Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Civil War came to an end by 1948. And by 1948, the current Chinese state, that is the PRC, ruled by the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, was established. So right from the beginning, it was clear that China under PRC, under the Communist Party, will be an aggressive expansionist power. It was clearly displaying expansionist tendencies. It was looking to capture more territory aggressively by using military force. So this is something that concerned all the countries in the region, including India. So India relied upon a British policy. We relied upon a British era policy of setting up the Himalayan kingdoms as buffers to protect India from any Chinese aggression. Is that clear? In the 1800s, British India also perceived threats from the north, especially from the then Russian Empire. British intelligence believed that the then Russian Empire was keeping its eyes on the Indian colony because India was a prized asset. So, as Britain believed that Russia might possibly invade India from the north, British India cultivated buffer states in the Himalayan region. All the Himalayan kingdoms, including Tibet, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan, they were all cultivated by the British as buffer states. The British had defeated all these kingdoms and they had secured their loyalty. They had signed agreements with the Kingdom of Tibet, Kingdom of Nepal, with the Kingdom of Sikkim and Bhutan, where they had pledged loyalty to the British, urging to protect British India from any northern invasion. Back then, the threat for British was from Russia, from the north. Post independence, the threat for India was from China. It was from an aggressive expansionist China. So India cultivated these Himalayan states as a buffer state to protect India's security interests. So naturally, India sought a close security strategic partnership. We gave a lot of investments to Nepal. We executed many critical infrastructure projects in Nepal in order to build a close partnership to generate goodwill with Nepal. That is why the system of open borders is critical for India. It's important to have Nepal in our favor, because otherwise Nepal might be dominated by China. China is aggressively looking to meddle in Nepal and in the Himalayan belt. So from the beginning, it has been a priority for India to outcompete Chinese presence and influence in the region. So as Nepal is a buffer state for India against Chinese aggression, it is more important for India to maintain friendly, cordial relations with Nepal. So from the beginning, India gave a lot of investments. We took up many key projects, including the Kathmandu Airport. The Tribhuvan International Airport in Nepal has been built by India with Indian funds. We built roads, railway lines, bridges. We tried investing in hydropower projects. So many such key infrastructure projects were executed by India with Indian assistance. So naturally, during this period, the relations were extremely close and there was an element of trust between the two countries. So India was clearly the dominant influence in Nepal, at least until 1975. Then, in the year 1975, there was a major development. The protectorate state of Sikkim, which was an independent kingdom, decided to merge with India following a referendum that was held in Sikkim. In 1975, Sikkim completed the formalities and it fully merged with India to become an integral part of the Indian Union. This merger of Sikkim with India happened under controversial circumstances. Is that clear? It has been alleged that India interfered and meddled in Sikkim to destabilize the then Chogyal dynasty that ruled over Sikkim. The allegation is that India's intelligence agency, that is RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, which had been set up recently in 1968, was allegedly used by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi to meddle in Sikkim to destabilize the Chogyal rule for strategic purposes. Because in the 1962 India-China war, Chinese troops had entered into Sikkim's territory and they had threatened India's strategic positions in the northeast. So to secure India's strategic interests, it's alleged, it's an allegation again. Government of India has never acknowledged it officially. It has been alleged that through a covert intelligence operation, India's foreign intelligence agency meddled and destabilized the Chogyal kingdom, created unrest and problems within the dynasty, forcing the Chogyal kingdom to merge with India. Is that clear? Now, please be very careful in such controversial topics. Don't ever mention this as your opinion. Don't make a statement that India meddled in Sikkim. India forced Sikkim to join India. Don't ever use such statements. It can be politically, diplomatically wrong. Right? Because we don't have concrete evidence or a public acceptance by the government that we carried out a disruption in Sikkim. But there is enough material available by former officers, by strategic experts, through which we can understand what might have happened. So it's all about speculation, right? So always be careful in such topics. You can say that there is an allegation, there is a controversy that India might have meddled in Sikkim, forcing the merger of Sikkim with India. So then it does not become your opinion, right? You're mentioning that there is an allegation by someone else, by a third party. You're making it a third party statement. So in such topics, be very careful. These topics will keep coming up when we talk about Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, right? We will discuss many of India's covert operations. There is some credible proof available in the public domain based on which I can discuss this in class. But you can't write that in an exam. When the government has not officially acknowledged it, you can't write that in the exam as your opinion, right? So say that it's an allegation, right? Say that it's a controversy that exists. So then it becomes a third party opinion, not your personal opinion. But the available evidence in public domain shows that India's RAW did meddle with the Chogyal dynasty. India's RAW was in a way responsible for creating unrest, which forced Sikkim's merger with India. And apparently this was done for strategic reasons. Given the threat from China in the Chumbi Valley, right, near Sikkim, India had major security interests to protect near the Nathula Pass, Doklam region, and Siliguri corridor. So it's believed that because of these strategic and military reasons, India forced Sikkim's merger with the country, thus securing India's security interests. So when this development happened, naturally, as you can expect, Nepal was worried. Nepal got worried about India's intentions. If a Himalayan kingdom like Sikkim could be destabilized and merged with India forcefully, right? Nepal believed that India might have similar designs for Nepal as well. Nepal started doubting India's intentions. So as a result, from 1975, a trust deficit came up in the relationship. The trust factor got affected. Nepal's rulers, right, the Rana clan, the Rana dynasty, who were very close to Indian leadership, they had actually very close personal relations with Prime Minister Nehru, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, right? This was a trust-based relationship. But because of Sikkim's merger with India under controversial circumstances, Nepal started doubting India. Nepal saw that a kingdom like Sikkim, if it is merged with India forcefully, the same might happen with Nepal as well. So because of these concerns, a trust deficit came up and Nepal started slightly moving away from its dependency on India, and it started cultivating China as well. Nepal started playing a double game. From here onwards, Nepal would repeatedly play the China card against India. Essentially, it will get closer to India to get benefits from China, and it will get closer to China as well to get benefits from India. Because both the Asian powers were competing for influence. A strategic competition between India and China had begun. So as Nepal had concerns about India's intentions, it deliberately got closer to China. It signed many key agreements with China and allowed China to play a big role inside Nepal. Chinese investments were accepted. China's military support was accepted. China got involved in projects in Nepal which countered Indian influence. Prior to that, India was the only dominant influence in Nepal. In fact, at one point, India even had military troops stationed inside Nepal. In the 1950s and 1960s, India had a military presence in the country where India was training Nepal's armed forces. We provided training to their armed forces. We even supplied weapons to Nepal's armed forces. And believe it or not, India-Nepal carried out joint patrolling of Nepal's borders with Tibet. The Nepal-China border was jointly patrolled by Indian Army and Nepal's army. That was the kind of equation we had. So now that Nepal had doubts about India, it deliberately started getting closer to China, allowing China to play a greater role inside Nepal. right? China was very eager to exploit this. China had major interest in Nepal, which I'm going to explain a little while later. China was waiting for such opportunities. In fact, China did not recognize Sikkim's merger with India for many decades. Until 2003, for almost 40 years after Sikkim joined India, China did not recognize Sikkim's merger with India. It exploited the issue and got closer to Nepal and established a strong presence and influence for itself, which allowed China to counter the Indian influence. So, this was a difficult period in the relationship from 1975 to 1990. We saw India's influence weakening and the rising influence of China, and a direct competition emerged between the two powers. A strategic competition emerged between India and China. So this got India worried. India had no such intentions to meddle inside Nepal or to force Nepal's merger with India. We never had such ambitions, right? India is not an expansionist power. Circumstances in Sikkim were entirely different. The Chogyal kingdom had its own internal problems. Plus, the threat from China was credible, right? Which pushed India to intervene and push Sikkim to join India. So, this situation was entirely different. India has never been an expansionist power, but Nepal's concerns were out of place. So, India got worried that rising Chinese influence could threaten our strategic interests. So, as a result, the relationship took a hit. A trust deficit came up, and it is believed that it led India to retaliate in 1989 1990. Again, it is alleged that India tried to put pressure on Nepal to move away from China by squeezing its economy. The allegation is that India instigated the Madhesis to protest and block the border roads, which crippled Nepal's economy. Remember, yesterday I had told you that in Nepal there is an internal divide, there is a social divide between the Madhesis of the Terai region and the Pahadis of the mountainous region. The Pahadis have always been dominant in Nepal, and allegedly they have oppressed, they have discriminated against the Madhesis. This is a long-standing concern of the Madhesi population. Madhesis have always alleged that the Pahadis, right, who are dominant, they are the dominant class, social class in Nepal. So they have alleged that the Pahadis have oppressed and discriminated against them. They have left them out of politics, out of the government, the army, and Madhesis have felt that the community has become backward because of the oppression and discrimination of the Pahadi elite. Pahadis are the elite in Nepal society even today. So since many decades, Madhesis have a demand for equal rights. They have a demand for equitable representation in the government. They have a demand for more inclusiveness in Nepal's constitution and society. So Madhesis and Pahadis have always had a conflict going on between them. And naturally, Madhesis are closer to India. The government of India shares very close ties with the Madhesis because of their connections in UP and Bihar. Please understand that the Madhesi problem becomes an electoral issue in India. The Madhesi problem in Nepal, in the Terai region, becomes an electoral issue in UP and Bihar because Madhesis are married to Indian families. And as you know, UP and Bihar play a critical role in Indian elections. The central government is dependent on the electoral support in UP and Bihar. Right? Politically, UP and Bihar are extremely strong, able to exert pressure on the government of India. So naturally, the Indian government is concerned about the Madhesi population. Right? On humanitarian grounds as well, India has a genuine concern about Madhesis because the community has been left out, they have been discriminated. So India has a genuine concern because the community is connected, linked with India. And it's an electoral issue, it's a political issue. So any ruling party at the center will be obliged to pay attention to the issue and put pressure on Nepal to protect the Madhesis and honor their demands. So it is alleged that in order to put pressure on Nepal's government, on the kingdom, apparently India instigated the Madhesis to carry out a protest to fight for their rights, asking for more equitable representation that led to the blockade of border roads. The open borders were shut for several weeks in 1989 1990, causing the crash of Nepal's economy. India denies these allegations. The government of India has denied this completely. But Nepal's government had alleged that it was India which carried out this economic squeeze deliberately to put pressure on Nepal in order to push the country to move away from China. Can you understand the complex interplay of factors between India, Nepal, and China? Right? It's a constant competition for influence. So India denies these allegations. Officially, India hasn't acknowledged its role, right? But there were very strong reports saying that India might have instigated the Madhesis to cause this economic blockade, to shut the borders by protesting, right? And this economic squeeze crashed Nepal's economy. Its GDP fell from 9.7 to 1.3%. And Nepal was forced to introduce multi-party political system in the country. Until then, Nepal was just a monarchy, right? It was just a kingdom ruled by the royals. But this economic squeeze, whether it was carried out by India or not, doesn't matter. It pushed the Nepali monarchy to introduce multi-party system. Now, how will this benefit India? Please think about it for a minute. See, if there is only one power center in Nepal, if the king and the royals are deciding Nepal's policy, that is when Nepal will keep shifting from India to China, China to India. That is when Nepal can play the China card to put India on the back foot. If there are multiple power centers, if there are multiple political parties which can contest in elections and participate in the governance of the country, then India can cultivate some of the parties. India can work with multiple power centers, ensuring that Nepal remains under India's fold, under India's influence, to keep Nepal away from Chinese influence. So that might have been the motivation for India, possibly, to create this crisis which pushed Nepal to introduce multi-party system. Is that clear? Again, it's an allegation. Please remember this. Government of India has never acknowledged its role. But many strategic experts, former officers, they have pointed towards possible Indian involvement in causing this economic blockade by using the Madhesi issue. So this is how countries play geopolitics, right? I know it may not seem right. It may not seem morally correct. But international relations is not driven by morals, values, or ethics sometimes. Sometimes in international relations, you have to choose between being an idealist or a realist. I'm telling this because there will be many such sensitive topics which will come up in all the classes. So I don't want you guys to be taken by shock and surprise, right? Because there are a lot of things India has done as well, just like any other power, right? India also has done a lot of things which may not seem right or morally correct, but it is a necessary thing to do sometimes. The world of international relations is a cold world. It's a cold-hearted world sometimes. Yes, sometimes idealism is good. Sometimes it is good to follow values, principles, morals, and ethics. But sometimes, to protect your national interests, you have to be realistic. You have to be pragmatic. Is that clear? That's why I told you yesterday that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies in geopolitics. A country has only permanent interests. This quote, popular quote, was by Henry Kissinger, the former national security advisor of the United States, right? A very popular thinker as well in the field of geopolitics. So there are permanent interests for a country to protect, national interests, right? You don't have permanent friends here, no permanent enemies. Sometimes you may have to work with your enemy. You may have to cooperate with your enemy, or sometimes you may have to act against your friend. That is how international relations work, right? For example, we may be cooperating with Pakistan on certain key issues, right? Or sometimes we may have to target Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, which might be friendly to us. That is how international relations work. That is how usually big powers work. So in IR and in political science, there is always a clash between the two schools of thought. It's a major theory in political science. In political science and IR, right, you have two schools of thought, the idealist school of thought and the realist school of thought. Idealist thinkers believe that you should always focus and prioritize ideals, that is, morals, principles, values, and ethics. You should do what is right. Is that clear? That is an idealist way of thinking. The other school of thought in political science and IR is the realist school of thought. These thinkers say that governments have to be realistic, pragmatic. You can't think of values, ethics, morals, and ideals all the time because you have your national interest to protect. You have bigger interests to protect. So sometimes you may have to do things that might be wrong, but for the larger good. This is a gray area that exists. Please understand, the world is not a binary world. It's not white and black. It's not zeros and ones. It's a gray area. There is a middle path that exists. So not all governments are extremely good. Not all governments are extremely evil. Right? This is a very one-sided picture portrayed in the media. So don't please go by that. Governments, they think strategically. Doesn't matter which party is ruling, and doesn't matter which country we are talking about. Any government will think on these lines. They will think on idealistic lines and realistic lines, and they will try to maximize opportunities to protect their core national interests. This is what pushes countries to do extremely wrong things as well. Right? If there is no balance between idealism and realism, sometimes countries take the entirely wrong path where they start backing extremism, radicalism, terrorism for the sake of geopolitics. Like how our dear neighbor Pakistan has done. Right? Pakistan, for its realistic policies, for its national interests, has used terrorism as a weapon against India. There are many big powers which have done that. United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Russia, European countries, and at some point, India as well. They have been involved in backing, sponsoring militants, extremist groups, terror groups for the sake of their national interests, for the sake of their geopolitics. So it's about where you draw the line, right? How you balance idealism and realism. Because there is no right and wrong here, right? That's a very narrow definition. You don't have anything right or wrong. Is that clear? It's about protecting your national interests. So sometimes you may have to do what appears to be wrong for the larger good of the country. But again, to what extent is the question? Where do you draw that red line is the question. So throughout this subject, you will find many such dilemmas, moral dilemmas, ethical dilemmas. Is that clear? So it is alleged that India was involved in causing the economic blockade, but officially India has denied it. See, this might have happened naturally as well. Madhesis are unhappy, right? They have a grievance. They have a major demand that they have been discriminated and oppressed by the Pahadis. So even without Indian involvement, Madhesis might have protested on their own. But we don't know, right? We are not in a position as common citizens to officially confirm that. But there are writings available. There are some records available to show that India might have been involved. Understood? So we can just make a speculation. So in the classroom, we can discuss all of this openly. Nothing wrong with that. But in the exam, you have to be careful. You can't say India forced Sikkim to join India. You can't say India blocked the borders with Nepal. You can't say India sponsored LTT in Sri Lanka. That can't be your opinion. Is that clear? You can always say that it's an allegation. It has been alleged that India was involved with the merger of Sikkim. That India interfered with Chogyal dynasty to force the merger of Sikkim. That's an allegation. It's alleged that India caused an economic blockade by supporting Madesi protests, which crashed Nepal's economy. And under this economic pressure, Nepal finally introduced multi-party system. It didn't become a democracy. It didn't turn into a republican state or a secular democracy. It was still a monarchy, still a theological state, but it allowed political parties to be established. It allowed political system to be introduced. And as a result, many political parties were born, such as the Nepali Congress. The Nepali Congress has largely been very close to India. It is seen as a pro-India party. Is that clear? The Nepali Congress has emerged as a major political power center, and traditionally it has been close to India. On most issues, it has favored India and worked with India, protecting India's interests. Understood? Then began a period of trouble in Nepal. After this development, the next 15 to 20 years were a nightmare in Nepal, because by 1990s, Maoist ideology had taken root in Nepal. The Maoist philosophy, the Maoist doctrine, which is the doctrine of Mao Zedong, right? Who's Mao Zedong? The founder of modern China, the founder of PRC, People's Republic of China. It was Mao Zedong, the then General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, who led the Chinese people into the Chinese Civil War in the 1930s and 1940s. Don't worry, don't get too bothered about the complexity of this topic, because I will discuss the Chinese Civil War in more detail when we come to India-China. Right? It is necessary to understand the background of PRC. We have to talk about the Chinese Civil War and role of the Communist Party and Mao Zedong. So there I'll give you more details. All right? So please hold on. As of now, don't worry about the details. From Nepal's perspective, please understand that the Maoist philosophy and Maoist doctrine that was laid down by Mao Zedong, the then leader of Chinese Communist Party, right? This ideology took root in Nepal. It was this ideology that led to the Chinese Civil War in 1930s, 1940s. In this civil war, the Communist Party won under the leadership of Mao Zedong, leading to the establishment of modern China. And this ideology is a left-wing extremist ideology. Is that clear? So the Chinese state, the PRC, has been actively promoting Maoist ideology around the world since 1950s. Since PRC came into being, the Chinese Communist Party has been supporting, funding the expansion of Maoist ideology around the world. And this is an extremist ideology. It's a left-wing extremist ideology. You will study more about this in internal security as well, right? We have a separate chapter for this. And we will study a little about Chinese Civil War and Mao Zedong under India-China as well. So right now, don't worry about the details. Just know these basic facts, because it is necessary to understand what happened in Nepal from mid-1990s to 2006. Because during this period, Nepal descended into a civil war. For 15 to 20 years, Nepal was devastated by a brutal civil war triggered by the Maoist elements in Nepal. What is this Maoist doctrine? Maoist doctrine believes in exploiting the social and class divide in the society. Right? In societies where the rich are extremely rich, they are elite, powerful, influential, where they have neglected and ignored the poor people, where they have oppressed and discriminated the farmers, the peasants, the tribal communities, and workers. In such societies where there is a lot of inequality, where there is a lot of social income and class divide, In such societies, Mao Zedong said that the peasants, the workers, and farmers, they should rebel. They should take up arms. They should lead an armed rebellion to overthrow the state and capture state power. This is the essence of Maoist doctrine. That's why it's an extremist ideology. We have seen this doctrine taking root in India as well. And you know this as Naxalism, or also known as Maoism. They both mean the same. Maoist ideology that gave birth to a left-wing extremist movement in India is known as Naxalism, because it took birth in a village called Naxalbari in West Bengal in 1967. So the Maoist philosophy is that this is what Mao Zedong preached. As a communist leader, as the general secretary of the Communist Party, he said that the people of China who had been oppressed, who had been discriminated by the elites, by the government, they should rebel, they should take up arms against the Chinese state. In 1930s, China was a divided society. There was a lot of social inequality, income divide and class divide. The rich were extremely rich and powerful, whereas farmers, peasants, workers were struggling, they were left behind. That is when Mao Zedong, as the leader of the Communist Party, established this philosophy, this extremist ideology, urging people, the masses, to lead an armed rebellion, a violent rebellion, to throw the state out, to throw the government out and capture state power. So such an extremist movement, such an insurgent extremist movement is known as Maoism. So China has constantly promoted the spread of this ideology, especially in 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Even in India, the rise of Maoism and Naxalism was backed by the Chinese Communist Party at one point. So in Nepal as well, we saw a direct role of China where it encouraged the rise of Maoism. Even in Nepal, there was a lot of inequality. There was a lot of social divide in the country between the rich and the poor. This divide was exploited by the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist branch of Communist Party of Nepal, established the Maoist philosophy with reported funding and support from China. In many ways, you can see this as China's covert war in Nepal against Indian influence. As India was regaining its influence following the economic squeeze, we saw the rise of Maoism that triggered a civil war between the Communist Party in Nepal and the Nepal government and the Nepal army. So Nepal was devastated by this conflict for more than 10 years, from around 95, 96. By then, the Maoist party had gained influence and a lot of support amongst the masses, and they led a civil war targeting the government of Nepal and the army of Nepal. So in this civil war, India and China were directly involved. Allegedly, China was backing the Maoist party initially. India obviously started backing the Nepali government and the army. India would supply funds and arms to defeat the Maoist movement because this was a common threat. Nepali Maoists were connected with Indian Naxals. Naxals in India, in Bihar, West Bengal, and in the Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh belt. They apparently had connections with Nepali Maoists. They were sharing funds and weapons with each other. So it was a security threat for India as well. And we couldn't afford a civil war in such a critical country. Right? A destabilized Nepal is bad news for India because it means that China's influence would rise. China would dominate the region, directly threatening our security and strategic interests. So at this crucial point, it is believed that India not only supported the government and the army to end the civil war, but reportedly, we even cultivated ties with the Maoists in Nepal. This was a strategy of India, a realistic policy of India. Right? Again, it might seem confusing. That is how international relations work. Sometimes the same country could be backing two sides in a conflict to protect their national interests. What was India's national interest when the civil war broke out? Our top priority was to stabilize Nepal. At any cost, India wanted to end the civil war. Doesn't matter how you do it. So initially, in the initial phase of the war, we obviously supported Nepal's army and the government. We gave them funds and weapons, passed intelligence to target the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist party, which was being supported by China. But later, in the later stages, it is alleged that Indian intelligence agencies established contact with the Maoists as well. Along with supporting the army and the government, we parallelly gave support to Maoists as well so that we could win favor on both the sides. We could get support on both the sides and we could use this as a leverage for a negotiated settlement between the two parties. This is how India could end the civil war and keep China out of Nepal. Are you following this? Our priority was to keep out Chinese influence. India knew for a fact that China might be backing the Maoist rebellion, right? Apparently by 90s, China had sponsored the rise of Maoism. It had direct links with the Communist Party of Nepal. China apparently was sending funds and weapons in order to instigate the armed rebellion against the Nepali government. Initially, when the civil war broke out, India obviously supported the Nepali government and the army, right? We also gave funds and weapons to Nepal to fight back against the militants, the insurgent outfit. But later, India realized that a one-sided war will not help us. The war will drag, and any further destabilization is not good news for India. So to quickly end the civil war, we had to conduct a negotiation. We had to bring both the parties to the negotiating table and work out a settlement between them. To do that, India needs leverage. We need influence on both. We already had influence on the Nepali government and army because of all the support we had given from 50 years. But now we needed influence on the Maoists as well. We had to pull them away from Chinese influence. So it is alleged that Indian intelligence agencies cultivated the Maoist party as well. But while supporting the government and the army, we parallelly supplied arms and funds to Maoists as well so that India could gain some influence over them to pull them away from China and use this influence to work out a negotiated settlement so that we could end the civil war as quickly as possible. Got it? So that is exactly what India did. The Maoist war began by 1996. Thousands were killed in the country over the next 10 years. It was a brutal civil war. Even within the royal family, there was a disaster. There was a major killing where several royal family members were assassinated by one of their own. This was an internal crisis within the Nepali kingdom during the civil war. In early 2000, you might have heard about this. Within the royal family, one of the heirs, one of the descendants, because of internal power struggle, right, he went on a shooting rampage, killing multiple people in the royal family, including the prince and several key members of the royal family. Right? Along with this disaster, the country was devastated by the civil war, where thousands of civilians were killed. So India had to work quickly, along with having influence with Nepal's government and army by supporting them in the war. Reportedly, India gave support to the Maoists as well to pull them away from Chinese influence. By doing that, India gained leverage on both the sides, and finally, we convinced them to work out a settlement through negotiations. India mediated between the two parties. That is how India positioned itself as a mediator. Or else we could have never done that. We could have never ended the civil war if we kept supporting only the army and the government. If we hadn't built contacts with the Maoists, given support to them as well, India would never have the leverage on them. So by playing both the sides, it is said, it is alleged that India positioned itself as a neutral mediator, and we worked out the historic 12-point peace agreement. India directly mediated this settlement to end the civil war, to end the Maoist uprising. So by 2006, the 12-point peace agreement was worked out, and through this, the Maoist party was allowed to enter mainstream politics in Nepal. Is that clear? According to the 12-point peace agreement, Nepal's government and the army will call for a ceasefire. They will essentially end the military operations against Maoists. The government and army, they were convinced by India to agree to a ceasefire, meaning they will halt all the military operations against Maoists. In return, India convinced the Maoists to surrender, to lay down their weapons and surrender in front of the government forces. So accordingly, the Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist, they surrendered. They laid down their arms and weapons and surrendered, and the government and army respected the ceasefire, thus ending the civil war. And according to the agreement, the Maoists were not targeted. A promise was made by Nepal's government and army under India's guidance that surrendered Maoists will not be targeted. They'll not be arrested or killed or punished. Rather, they'll be allowed to come back into mainstream and enter politics. That is how CPN Maoist became a major political party in Nepal. Believe it or not, today it's part of Nepal's government. The current Prime Minister of Nepal, Prachanda, Pushpakumar Dahal Prachanda, he was the Maoist leader, one-time insurgent, later a close friend of India, and today, right, he has become the Prime Minister and President of Nepal multiple times. So because of the 12-point peace agreement, it allowed for a negotiated settlement. It provided for a ceasefire where Nepal's army and government were withdrawn, military operations were ceased, the Maoists surrendered, laid down their arms and weapons, because there was a promise made that they will not be targeted. Rather, they'll be allowed to come back into mainstream, enter politics, or take up jobs in the army itself. Many Maoist fighters were recruited by Nepali army. Is that clear? Some of them were resettled, given jobs, and others were allowed to enter mainstream politics. And today, the Maoist party is part of the democratic political system. That is the change that India achieved. This was a remarkable achievement for India. As a mediator, right, India managed to end the civil war, which stabilized Nepal and also transitioned the country into a democratic, socialist, secular republic. Is that clear? It was through the 12-point peace agreement. It was through the 12-point peace agreement that Nepal decided to transition into a secular, democratic republic. Because by then, monarchy had weakened because of the killings within the royal family in 2002, 2003. Right? Because of that internal crisis within Nepal's royal family, monarchy had weakened. The kingdom had declined. So the time had come for Nepal to transition into a democracy, and it adopted secularism and republican principles and became a democratic nation following the 12-point peace agreement. Is that clear? By 2008, the transition was achieved and the Nepal Constituent Assembly was established to draft Nepal's constitution. Thus, Nepal's constitution making process began in the year 2008. Is that clear? The first democratic elections were held by 2007-2008. These elections led to the formation of a constituent assembly, which consisted of elected members from all the parties. It was a unity government, a national unity government, comprising of elected members from Nepali Congress, the Maoist Party, Madhesi parties, and all the other major political parties in Nepal. So the Constituent Assembly was given the responsibility to draft the new constitution to suit secular democratic republic principles of Nepal. Nepal became a new country essentially, adopting a new political system. So this marked India's remarkable success, right? Despite all the problems and challenges we had faced and the hurdles in the relationship, India had managed to mediate between both the sides and bring this conflict to an end. And we also ensured that Nepal transitioned into a secular democracy. Is that clear? So India was hoping that everything will become all right, as India had played a direct role in ending the conflict. But unfortunately, things turned around for India. It went the wrong way for India. India was heavily criticized after this inside Nepal, as Nepali politicians saw that India was interfering all the time in Nepal's internal affairs. Few politicians in Nepal and few political parties, especially the ones which were pro China, they started spreading a negative sentiment against India. And this is not entirely baseless. It is true as well to an extent, because as you saw, since 1980s at least, India has meddled excessively in Nepal's internal matters. And this is not my personal opinion. Many strategic experts, former diplomats, acknowledge this mistake. One big mistake India has done in Nepal is that we have excessively interfered in the internal matters of a sovereign country. Sometimes, yes, you may have to meddle to protect your interests. But again, if you don't draw the line, if you constantly keep interfering and putting pressure and manipulating events in the country, it will create resentment. It will breed negative sentiments, and hostile elements will exploit that. They will misuse that. So several politicians came up in Nepal and political parties came up which started exploiting the anti-India sentiments. There was a widespread feeling that India is the enemy. India is like a big brother, like a hegemonic power, exercising its hegemony, exercising its dominance on a small country, pushing small countries to change, interfering in the internal matters of small countries. These accusations started coming up because at least from 1980s, India had interfered excessively, either by supporting Madhesis or by allegedly playing a role in the economic blockade or by getting directly involved in the civil war. So after Nepal transitioned into a democracy and as it started the process of making its constitution, these anti-India sentiments started spreading. Is that clear? There was a strong allegation that India was constantly interfering in Nepal's internal matters, and this had affected Nepal's pride and identity. So many experts believe that India went overboard. There was a point where India should have drawn the line. For example, playing a role in the civil war was not a mistake. If China was backing Maoists, then India had to work both the sides to settle the conflict through a negotiated settlement. That is not a mistake. That's not a problem. The problem began with the constitution making process. It took Nepal 7 years to finalize its new constitution. There were multiple constitutions proposed. Every time it would lead to a controversy and crisis in the new parliament. And eventually, the governments would fall. Between 2008 and 2015, multiple Nepali governments have fallen, right? Because there has been no consensus within the parliament amongst the various parties that were part of the Constituent Assembly. And India apparently had a role to play in this dispute between different parties while drafting the constitution. So let's talk about the constitutional problems in Nepal and India's role during the constitution making process. As I told you, it took almost 7 years for Nepal to finalize its constitution. And during this period, multiple Nepali prime ministers and presidents had come and gone. Every time there would be a conflict or dispute in the parliament, in the constituent assembly, the government would collapse, leading to formation of a new constituent assembly. And every time it would be alleged that India is interfering. India is dictating how Nepal's constitution should be drafted. Now, see, any country will not appreciate this. Any sovereign country, any elected constituent assembly or parliament will not appreciate such external interference. Imagine how Indians would feel if the British had dictated how the Indian constitution will be drafted. So that is something which happened in Nepal. This was a result of the Madhesi problems, the Madhesi demands. See, Madhesis have a genuine demand. There is no doubt about it. Madhesis have been historically oppressed and discriminated by the Pahadis. But there should be a line where India should draw. There should be a point where India should stop interfering directly in the internal matters. See, Madhesis, as the new constitution making began, they felt it was the right opportunity to demand their equitable rights. Is that clear? There's nothing wrong with this. Madhesis historically have been left out. They have been oppressed. They have been discriminated. So they started demanding equitable rights. They wanted an equitable constitution. They wanted the new constitution to be more inclusive, and they wanted the issue of federalism to be addressed. Their primary demand was for more states to be created in the Terai belt. They wanted more number of states. As Nepal was setting up itself as a federal country, they wanted more states to be created for the Madhesi region, that is the Terai region. This would ensure more representation or more seats for Madhesis in the Nepali parliament. This was their primary demand. Madhesis were fighting for their equal rights. Previously, under the monarchy, their demands were never met. Pahadis had never acknowledged their concerns. Now that Nepal had become a constitutional democracy, it was in the process of drafting its constitution. It was the right time for Madhesis to raise their demands. Nothing wrong with that. Several political parties representing the Madhesis and the Janjatiyas, or the tribal communities, they raised their voice calling for equitable representation. They wanted more states to be created in the Terai region so that more seats will be allocated to the Madhes region in the parliament, which means more Madhes MPs will be elected. They will act as a voice in the parliament to protect the rights of the Madhesi people. This was a fair constitutional demand. But India should not have interfered beyond a certain point. We should have allowed this to happen as an organic internal process. This was Nepal's internal struggle. This was not our struggle. Right? This is where you decide where you draw the lines between idealism and realism. This is where experts also criticize India's excessive interference. Right? India started in a way dictating terms to Nepal as to how the constitution should be drafted. India gave complete and open support to Madhesi cause, and we demanded Nepal to ensure the constitution is inclusive and equitable. India was doing this largely because of humanitarian grounds and also political grounds. As I told you, Madhesi issue is an electoral issue in UP and Bihar. So keeping these aspects in mind, the government of India started putting pressure on Nepal to ensure that more seats are given to Madhesis in the parliament and more states are created in the Terai belt. But this created a backlash across political parties, in Nepali Congress, in the Maoist party, in other political parties. There was a backlash against India and very strong anti-India sentiments took root. The backlash was because India was seen to be constantly meddling in the internal matters of Nepal. right? From 1980s to 1990s to early 2000, and even after Nepal became a democracy. This is where strong anti-India sentiments took root, and it was exploited by few Nepali politicians and by few Nepali political parties, especially those parties and politicians which were seen as pro-China. They would exploit the anti-India sentiments, and based on Nepali pride and Nepali identity, they would promote Nepali nationalism. They would play the nationalist card, saying that Nepal's identity and pride were being hurt by India because India was meddling, dictating terms, and destabilizing the country. Such allegations were made, and it gave rise to several politicians and parties that could easily take a pro China position against India. They could take an anti India position and in favor of China. Is that clear? So, this became a volatile period again. After the Civil War, we thought everything will be all right. Possibly it would have been all right if India had stopped its excessive interference. But when we interfered in the constitution making process and gave open support to Madesi cause, it triggered a backlash against India, causing the rise of anti-India sentiments, where several parties and politicians became pro-China and they took a position against India. They built a political base for themselves by promoting Nepali nationalism and by blaming all the problems of Nepal on India. Right? Any problem in Nepal, they would point fingers at India, saying India is the problem. India is constantly interfering. And by saying this, they built an electoral base for themselves. They started winning elections. Is that clear? So essentially, India had shot itself in the foot. Right? The point where we should have halted our interference had been crossed. Our support for Madhesis and their demands was not perceived well in Nepal, which triggered the rise of strong anti-India sentiments. Got it? Now, let us see what happened after this. Let us understand what happened after 2015. Let's understand the problems created by this issue, and we'll also discuss the current relations under Prime Minister Modi. Is that clear? So, as I told you, the rise in anti-India sentiments saw the rise of Chinese influence. Both were parallel developments. As anti-India sentiments increased, pro-China sentiments also increased, which meant that Nepal was now firmly divided again between India and China. India still had a support base where many parties and leaders would support India, but many leaders had come up in Nepal who are openly taking an anti-India position and favoring China. And this is the kind of politics they built. Right? They built this on Nepali nationalism, Nepali identity, saying that India was the root of the problem. And as they started winning elections, gaining electoral prominence, this became a real problem for India. Eventually, in 2015, September 2015, the new constitution of Nepal was adopted. Finally, Nepal adopted its new constitution, and as you can expect, Madhesi demands were not met. Please make a note of this. Madhesi demands were ignored by the Constituent Assembly after 7 years of struggle, after 7 years of changes in government, changes in Constituent Assembly, and the derailed constitution making process. Finally, a new constitution was adopted, but it did not take into account the Madhesi demand. The demand for an equitable, just constitution was ignored by Nepali politicians and by Nepal's political parties that are dominated by the Pahadis. So, as this new constitution was adopted, obviously, India was not happy. Right? India was not happy about the new constitution because Madhesi demands were completely ignored. So, India supported the Madhesi cause, and we said Nepal has to include the demands of Madhesis. And then what happened was the Madhesis were angry. They were upset that even after decades of struggle, even after 7 years of pushing for inclusiveness in the constitution, their rights had not been provided, their demands had not been met, their concerns had not been addressed. So the Madhesis who were angry, they declared another round of economic blockade in 2015. As soon as the new constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly, immediately Madhesis rose up in protest and declared an agitation, the Madhesi agitation of 2015. Madhesi groups, they blocked the border roads. They imposed an economic blockade similar to the one in 1989, and they prevented the movement of people and goods between India and Nepal. So what will happen if there is economic blockade? It will crash Nepal's economy. Is that clear? Nepal is so heavily dependent on India. All essential supplies go from India. Medicines, food supplies, even fuel, petrol, gas, diesel, right? And many other essential supplies go from India. Nepal's access to Indian ports is critical for its foreign trade. So Nepal is heavily dependent on India, as we understood earlier. So if the roads are blocked, if there is an economic blockade, it's going to crash Nepal's economy. This had happened in 1989, and the same repeated in 2015 because of the second Madhesi agitation. Madhesis were angry, and justifiably, because from decades Madhesis had suffered. They actually have a genuine demand. But the Pahadis, who dominate all the political parties and the Constituent Assembly, never agreed to the Madhesi demands. So they went ahead and adopted a new constitution which didn't include Madhesi rights. It didn't provide for greater representation to Madhesis. So the angry Madhesi groups protested by blocking the border roads. So as soon as the economic blockade happened, Nepal's economy took a hit. Nepal's economy took a hit. And again, India was blamed. India was blamed for the crisis, leading to even more anti-India sentiments. Why was India blamed? Because the allegation was that India was using Madhesis, as India was not happy with the constitution. It was alleged that Madhesis were encouraged by the Indian government to block the roads and to put pressure on Nepal. Of course, these allegations were denied by the Indian government. The government of India denied all these allegations, saying we have no role in these protests. India did support the Madhesi cause. That is different, right? We did push for constitutional changes, but doesn't mean that India supported and backed the groups to block the road. Those are two different things. So officially, India denied any direct involvement. We said we support the Madhesi demand because they have been discriminated. The community has suffered. We want equal rights to be given to them because it's a matter of concern for India. Since Madhesis are culturally connected, we have familial ties in India, right? We are worried about Madhesi well-being. That is why we are supporting equitable rights for them, inclusive constitution for them. But doesn't mean that we are backing the protests and causing the economic blockade. This was the stand India took, but by then the damage was done. It was widely assumed in Nepal that India was instigating the protests, that India had backed Madhesi groups to cause the blockade to punish Nepal for the new constitution, which had been adopted against India's wishes. So again, there was a surge in anti-India sentiments. Is that clear? Prior to this, just a few months before, Nepal had been devastated by an earthquake. As you know, Himalayan belt is very vulnerable to earthquakes. There was a massive earthquake in 2015. And despite the tensions, India had given disaster management assistance. We had given a lot of support. We conducted a HADR operation, Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Operation, known as Operation Maitri. Please remember this. During the 2015 Nepal earthquake, India's NDRF and our armed forces, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, were deployed along with NDRF teams to help out Nepal during this disaster, to carry out search and rescue operations, to provide basic supplies of food, medicines, etc. India conducted Operation Maitri as a goodwill gesture to increase our soft power influence, to gain trust in Nepal. But the economic blockade which happened devastated the economy, and the people and political parties in Nepal were even more angry because they felt the country had not yet recovered from the earthquake. The earthquake had already devastated Nepal's economy. Within months, when they saw the economic blockade by Madhesis, they blamed India for this. They saw India as an inhuman country, which was exploiting the situation for its geopolitics. And despite the impact of the earthquake, they saw that India was causing the economic crisis by instigating Madhesis. So all these factors added. And even though we had genuinely helped Nepal under Operation Maitri, all the goodwill was destroyed. The goodwill generated was lost, and there was a backlash against India, giving rise to strong anti-India sentiments. So this began a very difficult period for India from 2016 to almost until 2021. For almost 5 years, it became a nightmare for India because anti-India leaders like KP Oli, KP Sharma Oli, rose to power based on anti-India politics by blaming every problem on India, right? By showing India as the problematic country which was interfering always in Nepal's internal matters. Leaders like KP Oli, KP Sharma Oli, built a strong image. He exploited Nepali identity and Nepali nationalism and won elections and became the leader of the country. He became the Prime Minister of Nepal in 2016. From January to August 2016. He again became the leader from 2019 to 2021. During his term as the Prime Minister, Nepal clearly adopted a pro-China approach and an anti-India policy. India faced multiple problems that threatened our strategic and security interests under the leadership of KP Oli. All right? So that is why I had to give you all that background to make you understand what has happened in the last few years. The background is essential. If I just tell you that anti-India sentiments were strong, right, you'll not understand the whole issue. You should know why it happened. From 1980s, there is a strong allegation that India constantly interferes in Nepal. This is true to an extent. Sometimes the involvement has been necessary, like the civil war, for example. But sometimes when you cross the line, right, when you constantly interfere, that too in the constitution making process, even though we were doing the right thing, right, supporting Madhesis was the right thing, idealistic policy, it was an idealistic approach, but the realistic approach dictated that we shouldn't have meddled. We should have let the matter to be decided by Nepalis themselves. It's their sovereign issue, internal issue, let them decide. But as India interfered, it created this backlash which kept building up, and after the Madhesi agitation, these sentiments became even more stronger, right? So in a way, the blame is shared by both Manmohan Singh government and the Modi government, right? Of course, there are many successes as well. But this policy towards Nepal, where we lost influence, where we saw the rise of anti-India sentiments, is partly a failure of Indian foreign policy, right? A failure of both the Manmohan Singh government and the Modi government, where we compromised our goodwill, our trust-based relationship, because India would not draw that line when it came to supporting the Madhesi cause. Is that clear? So under KP Oli, multiple problems came up for India. We will discuss the problems as well. Border dispute was escalated. China was given a bigger role, and China started winning all critical projects. Nepal joined the Belt and Road Initiative of China. Nepal agreed to become a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is opposed by India. India has boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative of China. It's also called One Belt, One Road project. Is that clear? Don't worry, we'll discuss this later again When we come to India, China, we'll take a detailed look at what is Belt and Road Initiative, but it will keep coming up in every chapter. It's a basically it's a massive infrastructure project being pushed by China. It includes a network of roads, railway lines, oil and gas pipelines, then maritime links and port development. So China is developing seaports, airports, highways, railway lines, and oil gas pipelines and power plants and industrial clusters across the world, across Asia, Africa, and Europe. So China plans to dominate the Indo-Pacific through the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a series of global infrastructure projects. So India opposes Belt and Road Initiative. We have boycotted it for a certain reason. And Nepal, being a neighbor of India, a close neighbor of India, went against India's interests and joined the Belt and Road Initiative, which means China will extend its highways and railway lines into Nepal closer to the Indian border. From Tibet, highways and railway lines will be built, and China will bring its presence right next to the Indian border. China's investments went up rapidly during these years, especially after 2016, during KP Oli's rule. When he became the leader of the country, he openly adopted an anti-India approach, allowed China to play a bigger role, and there was a surge in Chinese investments. China took up many strategic projects, and it countered the Indian influence, which until then was very dominant. Right? Until then, India was always the dominant country. But today, China is a strong competition for India, and it's a constant conflict between India and China, where they are fighting for influence in Nepal. In fact, you see this happening in every other neighboring country, across the Indian Ocean, across South Asia, in every country, in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, right, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. In all the countries, you see a India-China competition. As the two large hostile Asian powers, they are competing for influence, right? And you see this playing out in every country in the Indian Ocean and in South Asia. You see this happening in the Indo-Pacific, in Southeast Asia as well. All right. So this theme will be discussed in every chapter. Under every country, you will understand the India-China competition, the strategic competition. Got it? So this is how relations stand as of today. From 2016 to 2020, during those 4 to 5 years, lot of tensions came up in India-Nepal relationship, especially because of the escalation of the border dispute. KP Oli unnecessarily triggered a old border dispute, a minor border dispute, and made it a big issue, which harmed India-Nepal relations. Nepal almost became hostile to India quite openly. Chinese influence increased. China invested more in the country, and Nepal joined the Belt and Road Initiative. So our Nepal policy was derailed. Is that clear? This was contradictory to what India had promised. In 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came to power, he launched the Neighborhood First policy of India. It's a flagship policy of Prime Minister Modi, under which India promised to give priority to its immediate neighbors. I'm not sure if you guys remember, in 2014, when PM Modi was elected for the first time, during his swearing in ceremony, when he was sworn in as the Prime Minister for the first time, Prime Minister Modi invited all the SAARC leaders for the swearing in ceremony. The leaders of Nepal, Bhutan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Maldives and Mauritius, all of them, all the SAARC leaders especially, they were invited to be a part of the swearing in ceremony. This was a landmark step by Prime Minister Modi. It was unprecedented. Right at the beginning of a new government, all the South Asian leaders were invited to be a part of the swearing in ceremony, and that is when the Neighborhood First policy had been launched. It was a symbolic gesture by the Prime Minister. A symbolic gesture was being sent by India that under the Modi government, neighboring countries will get top priority. India will normalize its relations with all the neighbors and provide for friendly ties with all the neighbors. This was a commitment that had been made. But because of all these problems, all these issues, right? Some of it were Indian mistake. Some of it was because of leaders like KP Oli. and some of it was because of China's interference. So, because of all these factors, India's policy in Nepal got derailed. Our interests got compromised. Our influence was badly affected. In 2014, PM Modi had even visited Nepal. It was one of the first countries that Modi visited. He had addressed Nepal's parliament and he had promised not to interfere in Nepal's internal matters. Because from last 30 years, there was an allegation that previous governments had interfered in Nepal. Right? So Prime Minister Modi tried taking a new approach, tried to correct the previous mistakes, and he promised to the Nepali parliament openly that India will not interfere henceforth. India also agreed to revise the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Since Nepal had concerns about the treaty, right, it felt security problems are arising because of this, and it felt India benefits from the treaty than Nepal. To honor Nepal's demands, we had even agreed to renegotiate and upgrade the 1950 treaty. Despite the good beginning that was made by Prime Minister Modi, India lost the track again because of constant allegations of interference. The interference in the constitution making process, the alleged support given to Madhesi agitation, the insensitivity shown after the earthquake apparently contributed to the rise of anti-India sentiments, which was exploited by leaders like KP Oli. He built an anti-India image, favored China openly, and compromised India's interests. So the border disputes were reopened, public opinion was turned against India, and China was favored and preferred in all key projects in Nepal. This is how things turned for India, at least until 2021. But now things have turned around again. Is that clear? There is a turnaround that we are noticing. From 2021 to 2023, we are seeing a turnaround in Nepal. Thankfully, KP Oli had to resign. Because of our internal crisis, there was a political constitutional crisis where the Supreme Court of Nepal also intervened. And KP Oli, the anti-India leader, the pro-China leader, was forced to step down. He was forced to resign. Fresh elections happened recently, and under the new government, which is headed by Prachanda, an old friend of India, he's the leader of Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist. The Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist, is relatively friendly to India. Nepali Congress is also friendly to India. All right, these are friendly parties to India. Our problem is with KP Oli's faction, which is the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist. Or CPN UML. This party is the problem for India. Is that clear? The Maoist party, which was involved in the Maoist war, has been relatively favorable towards India because India has maintained good contact and India has been a good friend to Prachanda. The current leader, current Prime Minister is Prachanda, Pushpakumar Dahal. All right, the current president, Ramchandra Podel, is also very close to India. He comes from Nepali Congress. So these parties have been historically close to India. Be it Prachanda, Nepali Congress, and CPN Maoist. These parties traditionally are closer to India. They either favor India or balance India and China. At least they don't take anti-India positions and they don't openly favor China as much. Problem is with CPN, UML, Unified Marxist-Leninist, and leaders like KP Oli. They have built their political base by always promoting anti-India sentiments, by always favoring China quite openly. All right? But thanks to the stepping down of KP Oli, he had to resign because of an internal crisis. And the new government has been resetting the relationship. That is how things stand as of today. All right? Recently, Prachanda visited India just 2 months back in June 2023. The new Nepalese leader, the new Prime Minister of Nepal, Prachanda, he paid a important visit to India, during which he has promised that Nepal will reset the relationship and it will protect India's interests. During this visit, many new projects were announced. Many infrastructure projects from India have been announced, including hydropower projects, railway lines, highway projects, etc. And in return, Nepal has promised not to instigate the border dispute, to resolve the border issue through negotiations, and to restore the balance in India Nepal relations. So now we are seeing a favorable development, which shows that the Modi government has tried to reset the policy and repair the mistakes that had been done previously. All right. So this is the entire evolution of India Nepal relations. I hope all the points are clear. Now we can take a short break. Let's take a 15 minutes break. We'll come back and resume the discussion from here. We will talk about the security issues. We'll discuss more on India China competition as well. We will talk about hydropower sector, some Indian projects in Nepal, and the general economic ties between the two countries and the cultural ties. So that will end our chapter and our discussion on India Nepal relations. Once we end the chapter, I'll take all your questions. All right? It will take maybe another 45 minutes to 1 hour. Let's wrap up the chapter and I'll take all your questions and doubts at once. So let's take a 15 minutes break. It is 6:47. Let's come back at 7:02 p.m. 15 minutes exactly, and I'll see you at 7:02. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. Now, before we begin, we have a small announcement. Yesterday, we told you that the recordings of the classes will be available only for 7 days, only for 1 week. I explained the rationale as well behind it, but still, we noticed that many of you have concerns about this. So, to clear all these concerns, to clarify why the recording shouldn't be provided more than 7 days, we will have a special session this Thursday. Sarmad sir will be taking the session at 8:30. That is after my class ends. At 8:30, Sarmad sir will address you live to explain the rationale behind why the recordings are available only for 7 days. This is for your benefit. As I told you, we have noticed disciplinary issues, attendance related issues, where students are missing the classes, assuming that recordings are available. They're postponing the classes by days, weeks, and months, and that does not serve the purpose for the exam, right? So we will have a special session this Thursday. Please attend after my class ends at 8:30. Sarmad sir will go live and will provide you more clarity on why recording should not be provided for more than 7 days. Any doubts, any questions you have, you're free to raise them in the session so that all your doubts are clarified. I hope that addresses some of your concern at least. So now let's get back to our discussion. Let's wrap up India Nepal by looking at the remaining topics under this relationship. Now we have completely understood the political relations, the entire diplomatic relationship from 1947 till now. We have also spoken about the various issues and challenges that we have faced. So let's talk about the security and strategic concerns in the India Nepal relationship. Let's focus on the border dispute. I told you that leaders like KP Oli exploited the border dispute. They escalated the border issue recently and turned it into a major issue which affected India Nepal relations. So let's take a look at this border dispute. You should know where exactly is the border dispute present, what's the background, and what happened recently, what was the escalation, and how India has handled this border crisis. See, India and Nepal, we have a standing border dispute at two locations, at Kalapani and Susta. These are the two locations which are disputed along the India-Nepal border. And these disputes are very old disputes. They are more than 2 centuries old. The origin of the dispute dates back to colonial times. It's a legacy that the British have left behind for us. Remember, yesterday I told you, while discussing South Asia and while giving you an overview of South Asian geopolitics, I told you that most of the geopolitical problems we have in South Asia today, they're all a result of colonial blunders that were committed. If divide and rule policy was a major blunder, drawing haphazard boundaries was the second blunder that the British committed. If you look at India-China boundary issue, the Kashmir conflict, the boundary dispute with Nepal, they all have a common origin, the colonial legacy, the colonial mistakes that were done by drawing haphazard boundaries. So the disputed Kalapani and Susta, they trace back their origin to the Treaty of Sugoli that was signed in 1816 following the Anglo-Nepalese War. In 1816, the British defeated the Kingdom of Nepal, but they decided not to annex Nepal into British India. Because I told you earlier that the British wanted to cultivate buffer states in the Himalayan region to protect their India colony from any possible Russian invasion from the north. So even though they defeated the Kingdom of Nepal, they did not annex Nepal. The same logic applies for Tibet, Sikkim, and Bhutan as well, right? The Kingdom of Tibet was eventually made loyal to the British government in India. Same with Bhutan and Sikkim. They were given their autonomy. Nepal also was given its autonomy. These kingdoms continued. But the condition was that they will protect British interests. They will be loyal to British India. So, in the Anglo-Nepalese War, even though Nepal was defeated, Britain did not annex the territory. Nepal remained a separate kingdom. It was not a part of British India. This autonomy had been given so that Nepal would be a buffer state. And as a result, the boundary had to be settled. The boundary between British India and Kingdom of Nepal had to be drawn. It had to be redrawn after the Treaty of Sugauli. So, in the Treaty of Sugauli, which ended the war, the boundaries between British India and the Nepal Kingdom was demarcated. While drawing these boundaries, blunders were made, few mistakes were made. This legacy has continued. We inherited these borders after independence. India-Nepal inherited the present boundary from the British, which is a result of Treaty of Sugauli. So the mistakes were also inherited, and these issues continued. They continue to remain as part of India-Nepal relationship. But however, until 2019, these were minor disputes. Since India-Nepal traditionally shared a close relationship, both the governments never escalated these minor boundary issues. It's not a major border dispute, actually. The territory involved and the complexity of the issue involved, both are very minor issues. So both the countries had kept it on the back burner. Due to the lack of political will to settle the dispute, previous governments had allowed the dispute to remain, as it was a minor issue which was never escalated by either India or Nepal. Both were sensitive to each other's concerns, and Kala Pani or Susta had never become a major issue in the past. But all of a sudden, in 2019, KP Oli's government unnecessarily escalated the issue and turned it into a major border dispute. So let's understand the background. Let's see where the disputes are located. You have to be familiar with the location, the map, and the places present near the disputed area. It could be very important for your prelims as well. To resolve this minor boundary dispute, we have even set up a joint technical boundary committee. In 1981, a technical boundary committee was set up and a survey was also completed. So to determine how the boundary can be redrawn to settle the dispute forever. But unfortunately, both sides have delayed it. Again, it could become a political issue. So the governments kept the issue on the back burner and they never addressed the issue. So this minor issue which remained was exploited by pro-China leaders like KP Oli deliberately to create problems in India-Nepal relationship. Is that clear? We also have a boundary working group constituted in 2014 to undertake further field work, to conduct ground level survey and consult the local people, based on which we can resolve the dispute forever. But unfortunately, the process remains incomplete, and this was exploited by KP Oli. So let's look at the Kala Pani dispute first. Let's understand where Kala Pani is located, why the dispute arises. What is the legacy left behind by Treaty of Sugauli? We'll also look at Susta dispute as well. Kala Pani is located in the Pithoragarh district of today's Uttarakhand. It's part of Indian territory, it's part of Indian administration. Since 1947, Kala Pani has been under Indian control. It has been under Indian administrative control. Is that clear? Today it's part of Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand. It is located at the tri-junction of India, Nepal, and China. So Kala Pani occupies a strategic location. It's at the tri-junction of India, China, and Nepal, and it's very close to the Lipu Lake Pass, the strategic Lipu Lake Pass. The Lipu Lake Pass connects India with Tibet. It is one of the routes, one of the historical routes through which cross-border trade has happened in the ancient medieval times. Buddhism has traveled through this route. Hindu pilgrims used to travel through this route, mainly to reach Mount Kailash as part of Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra. You can see Lake Manas Sarovar, Rakshastal, and Mount Kailash, which are sacred in Hinduism. They are in Tibet, right? So Lipu Lake is one of the routes to access Mount Kailash. Even today, Indian pilgrims, Hindu pilgrims are sent by the Ministry of External Affairs, which organizes the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra with China's support. Lipu Lake is strategically important, not just culturally and economically. It is a border trading point. Culturally, it is significant because of Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra and the history behind it. But strategically also it is important because both India and China have a strong military presence at Lipu Lake Pass. In fact, it is a border meeting point for negotiations between Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army. If there are any incursions and standoffs and disputes, Indian Army meets with PLA at Lipu Lake in this sector to conduct a discussion, a negotiation with the Chinese side. So both sides have a strong military presence here, and strategically, from a military perspective, Lipu Lake and this whole region is very, very vital. So right next to Lipu Lake, you have this triangular region called Kala Pani, which is part of Pithoradgarh district of Uttarakhand. Is that clear? Now, under the Treaty of Sugauli in 1816, to draw the boundary between British India and the Kingdom of Nepal, the Kali River, which passes through this region, it's also called Mahakali. It's part of the Ganga river system, one of the tributaries, the Kali or Mahakali. This river was used as a reference under the Treaty of Sugauli to identify the boundary. Is that clear? So according to the treaty, the westernmost tributary is supposed to define the boundaries between India and Nepal. The river itself has been used as a reference point to identify the boundary between then British India and Kingdom of Nepal. So we inherited this after independence. Now the problem between India and Nepal is that we have a different perception of the Kali River. Because the Kali River has multiple tributaries here at the Tri-Junction, right near Lipu Lake in the Kalapani region. There are many channels, many small tributaries that join the Kali. The Treaty of Sugauli does not specify which tributary exactly marks the boundary. It is a very vague description. India claims that the easternmost tributary, that is this channel which lies towards the east, towards Nepal, is the Kali River referred to in the treaty. And according to that reference, Kalapani should fall under Indian jurisdiction. Our interpretation of Treaty of Sugauli is that the easternmost tributary, which is in Nepal, was used as a reference by the British. So according to India, Kalapani should belong to us. But Nepal has the opposite interpretation. Nepal believes that the western tributary of the Kali is the reference taken under the Treaty of Sugauli, that is somewhere over here. And accordingly, Nepal claims Kalapani to fall under its jurisdiction. It is a difference of perception because the treaty does not provide that clarity. The treaty lacks the clarity. It does not specify exactly which branch of the Kali marks the boundary. India has a perception that the eastern tributary is the reference, which means Kalapani will fall under India. Nepal has an opposite interpretation. The westernmost tributary, which passes through India, through the Limpi-Adura region, right? That is seen as the boundary by Nepal. So it claims Kalapani to be a part of its own territory. So this was always a minor dispute. But suddenly the issue has been escalated, and I'll explain why. We'll come to that later. Now let's see what the Susta dispute is all about, where it is located and why the dispute arises. The Susta dispute lies along the Nepal-Bihar border. If Kalapani dispute is along Nepal-Uttarakhand border, this is along Nepal-Bihar border. To determine the boundary here, under Treaty of Sugauli, the Gandak River was used as a reference. Just like Kali River was used as a reference to draw the boundary, under Treaty of Sugauli, the Gandak River, also known as Sapta Gandaki or the Narayani River, it's another major tributary of the Ganga. This river was used as a reference point to identify the boundaries between British India and the Kingdom of Nepal. The treaty says that right bank of Gandak is Nepal, left bank of Gandak is Indian territory. That is what the Treaty of Sugauli says. Now, if you go by this interpretation, if you go according to the treaty, back in 1816, Susta was present on the right bank of Gandak. What does it mean? Whatever is to the right bank of Gandak is Nepal's territory. So Susta, back in 1816, this place called Susta was on the right bank of Gandak, which meant it was Nepal's territory. Is that clear? In the map, you can see the Narayani River here flowing down into India towards Bihar. Somewhere over here, we have Susta. As it was on the right bank of the Gandak, it was supposed to belong to Nepal. But please understand, Himalayan rivers, they change course over time. You would have studied this in geography. Himalayan rivers, they keep meandering. Right? The nature of Himalayan rivers is such that it keeps meandering and it keeps changing course over a period of time. Now, almost 150 years had passed by the time of independence. And by 1947, Susta had fallen on the other bank. The course of the river had changed in such a manner that now the Susta, the place of Susta, was located on the left bank of Gandak. So now whom does Susta belong to? It belonged to Nepal before. Now if you interpret Treaty of Sugauli, left bank is Indian territory. So if the river has changed course, India's interpretation is that Susta should belong to us because it's on the left bank of the river. Everything on the left bank of the river is Indian territory. But Nepal rejects this interpretation because when the treaty was signed, Susta was on the right bank. It meant it was Nepal's territory. The problem is the river has changed course. So Susta, which was on the right bank before, has now shifted to the left bank, thus leading to a difference of opinion between India and Nepal. Now the problem again is the British methodology that was used to draw the boundaries. Historically, yes, mountains, forests, and rivers were used as reference points for drawing boundaries. But with the evolution of better surveys and mapping, better methodologies should have been used. Instead of giving generic definitions of the boundary, identifying random reference points by using rivers, the British should have done a better job at drawing the boundary. Or at least India, Nepal, after independence, should have negotiated the boundary and settled the boundary dispute then and there. But since we allowed the minor issue to remain, it has remained a persistent border dispute. Both the sides have claims on Kalapani and Susta, right? And it has been a festering dispute. Now, suddenly in 2019, KP Oli escalated the issue. So why did this happen? There must be some reason, correct? According to experts, there were two possible triggers. You already know that KP Oli was seen as a pro-China leader, someone who was favoring China and compromising Indian security and strategic interests. In 2019, there were some important developments. We revoked the special status of Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370. J&K was reorganized into Union Territory of J&K and Ladakh. So our political map had changed. The state of J&K had become Union Territory of J&K and Ladakh. So to reflect those changes, a new political map of India was published by the government. In this new map, we showed Kala Pani as Indian territory. This has been our practice. Even before, Kala Pani was shown as Indian territory, because it has always been under Indian administration since 1947. But because we published a new map and showed Kala Pani as Indian territory, Nepal got triggered by this new map. KP Oli objected to the new map published by India, which showed Kala Pani as Indian territory. He opposed the new map and he pushed a constitutional amendment. His government amended Nepal's constitution, and even they brought out a new map showing Kala Pani as Nepal's territory. This led to a major escalation. KP Oli even ordered the deployment of Nepali troops near Kala Pani to claim the territory. Right? He was showing aggressiveness. He publicly criticized India and brought out this constitutional amendment. Nepali parliament amended the constitution to show Kala Pani as Nepal's territory by publishing its own map. This was a very big escalation for India, and KP Oli was making aggressive statements about using troops and deploying the army. So this led to a quick escalation of tensions. But a careful analysis shows why this escalation might have happened. According to strategic experts, this escalation is linked to a strategic road that has been built and inaugurated by India near the Lipu Lake Pass. Please go back to the map. I'll show you a road. Can you see this place called Darchula over here? It's located right on the border of India and Nepal in Uttarakhand. From Darchula to Lipu Lake, we didn't have a good road. You have mountainous terrain. It's a very difficult geography here. So it was difficult for Indian troops to mobilize men and equipment. If India had to deploy, the Indian army, if it had to deploy troops and weapons and equipment to the Chinese border, it was very difficult because we didn't have a good all-weather road. During winter, it would get shut down because of snowfall. And also the old road was not good enough. It was very difficult to pass through the road. And because of the bad road conditions, it was not preferred by the Foreign Ministry, External Affairs Ministry, for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra. The pilgrims had to trek. Since the road was not available, pilgrims had to conduct a very high-risk trek to reach the higher altitudes and then cross into Tibet. So even though it's a shorter route, it was not a preferred route for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra. The other route was preferred by Ministry of External Affairs, which is the Nathula Pass in Sikkim. Via Nathula Pass, you have a better road. You have a very good road that connects Sikkim with Tibet. But the problem is it's a very long route. But since an easier road route was available, for Kailash Manasarovar Yatra, this was the preferred route. Indian pilgrims would be taken from Nathula Pass towards Mount Kailash through this long road via Ministry of External Affairs and the Chinese government. So to make it easy for the pilgrims to access Mount Kailash to the shorter route, to save time and reduce time, and also for strategic reasons to enable Indian Army to quickly mobilize troops and equipment if required, a strategic road was built by the Border Roads Organization. BRO built a strategic road connecting Darchula with Lipu Lake. In this difficult terrain, a strategic road was built, all-weather road was built, which will not only serve a cultural, historical purpose to enable the crossover of Indian pilgrims to Mount Kailash, but it would also help the Indian Army to quickly mobilize troops. So this strategic road was completed in 2020 and India inaugurated the road in May 2020. Now, who is threatened by this road? Who will be affected? Obviously, China. China has opposed India's military modernization. It has opposed India's improving border infrastructure. This strategic road was a threat for China near the Lipu Lake Pass. And experts believe that this is the reason why KP Oli escalated the issue, because the road passes through the disputed Kala Pani region. Can you see the link? Can you understand how complex geopolitics can be? KP Oli most likely caused a deliberate escalation. He deliberately opposed the new political map. The map was not the real problem. From 1947, we have shown Kalapani as Indian territory. Nepal was never offended by it. It was a minor issue. We were negotiating it. Right? Yes, there has been a delay. That is the mistake that India-Nepal did. But it was never a major dispute. So if KP Oli suddenly escalated the issue, there must be some other reason. And experts believe that he could have done this at the instigation of China. He has been seen as a pro-China leader, anti-India leader. As soon as India inaugurated the strategic Darchula-Lipu Lake road, right, China felt threatened by the road. Possibly it could have used Nepal to poke at India, to instigate India, and also to affect India-Nepal relations. So when KP Oli became aggressive, it disrupted the relations and tensions increased between India and Nepal. Because KP Oli spoke about it aggressively. He said India has occupied Nepal's territory. He said we'll use our army and troops to capture the territory from India. These were words which were pushing the two countries towards a war, towards a conflict. So naturally, tensions escalated. But thankfully, India reacted in a very mature manner. The Modi government, right, did not react instantly. We did not pass any adverse comments immediately, right? We knew what was happening behind the scenes. So India held its ground. India held its ground that Kalapani is Indian territory. If Nepal has an issue, we will negotiate. We are open for talks. There is no need for aggression. There is no need for increasing tensions. So India kept saying that let's negotiate, let's discuss. And India's mature response helped in maintaining the balance. And finally, KP Oli was removed because of an internal political problem. Because of the constitutional crisis and the Supreme Court's intervention, KP Oli had to resign. And once he stepped down, the issue has become normal again. The next Nepali government and the current leaders as well, they have assured India that they will not escalate Kalapani issue. We will discuss, we will negotiate, we will work out a negotiated settlement for both Kalapani and Susta. India and Nepal have been historical friends, traditional friends. Despite all the issues and complexities, we are still good friends of each other. So thanks to the restoration of pro-India government and pro-India leaders, there has been some normalcy in the last 2 years. Nepal has reassured India that this was a mistake that happened under KP Oli. It will not be repeated. Tensions will not be escalated. We will sit, negotiate, and work out a settlement to permanently resolve these two boundary disputes. Is that clear? So this is what you should know about the boundary dispute between India and Nepal. It's a very important topic. It's a recent development. So you can expect a mains question as well, or even prelims question on Lipu Lake Pass, Kalapani region, the Kali River, and the Darchula Lipu Lake Road. That's why I marked all those places. It's very, very important for your prelims as well. I hope the topic is clear. Now let's understand the security issues and border security challenges along India-Nepal border. As I was mentioning earlier, along the India-Nepal border, we have many challenges, many security problems. Most of the problems arise because it's an open border. Along with being an open border, the terrain is very complicated. The geography, the topography of this region of the India-Nepal border is very complex. Towards Uttarakhand, You have mountainous terrain, the Himalayan mountains. Then you also have dense forests towards UP and Bihar, towards the Terai. You have multiple rivers and wetlands which are part of the Gangetic River Basin. And towards Sikkim, you again have mountainous terrain with dense forests and jungles. So this is a very complex terrain. And when you have such a complex geography, the border becomes a porous border. Meaning, there are natural gaps in the border. When you have such high mountains, dense forests, large rivers and wetlands present, they become natural gaps caused by the geography of the region, the terrain of the region. These gaps cannot be secured, cannot be patrolled easily. Border security, border patrolling becomes very difficult, very challenging because of the porous nature of the border, because of the natural gaps that exist along the boundary, which is a result of the complex terrain along the India-Nepal border. So as border security is difficult, patrolling these areas is difficult, it easily enables organized crime. All types of organized crime is present, including drugs trafficking, that is smuggling of drugs across the border, arms trafficking, wildlife trafficking. Several threatened species of plants and animals are hunted by hunters and poachers, and they smuggle wildlife products across the border. All right? All these are criminal activities, organized criminal activities. Human trafficking is very rampant, where people are sneaked across this border. This has enabled infiltration of Pakistani terrorists, as Pakistan's ISI used Nepal as a base for promoting terrorism against India. Especially in 1990s, Pakistan had turned Nepal into a base for promoting terrorism against India, to promote cross-border infiltration as part of its covert proxy war against India. Pakistan has been waging this secret war by using proxies, by using non-state actors like terrorist organizations. These Pakistani-sponsored terrorists, with the backing of ISI, they found a strong base in Nepal and they exploited the open border by working with criminal organizations to push terrorists across the border into India. We have seen many terror attacks against India emanating from Nepal. Is it clear that local support was created by Pakistan? For example, the hijacking of IC-814 in 1999. It was a major terrorist incident where an Indian aircraft coming from Kathmandu to Delhi was hijacked by Pakistani terrorists at Kathmandu. These hijackers, they took the aircraft away from India, from India's airspace, because of the poor response of the then Vajpayee government. The then Vajpayee government failed to deal with the crisis effectively, which allowed the hijackers to take the aircraft out of India, and they took the hijacked aircraft with hostages to Pakistan, then to Dubai, and finally landed at Kandahar in Afghanistan. I hope you know that in 1999, Afghanistan was ruled by the Taliban, and Taliban has been a proxy of Pakistan's ISI. The ISI controls the Taliban as well. So once the aircraft landed in Kandahar, India had no other option. Once the aircraft left Indian airspace, we had no option of any commando intervention or military intervention. India could never think of using the Black Cat commandos or NSG for an intervention to rescue the hostages. Such an operation was out of the question. No country would allow that. especially Afghanistan, because Taliban was openly hostile to India. India had no relations with the Taliban government, as it was close to ISI. It was close to terror groups like Lashkar and other groups. India had boycotted the Taliban, and Taliban had thrown India out from Afghanistan. Our embassy had been shut. We had no diplomatic relations with Taliban. So the hijacked aircraft was surrounded by the Taliban fighters, and India was forced to negotiate. The Vajpayee government had to negotiate with the hijackers, and we released 3 dreaded terrorists from our custody in order to save the hostages. There was tremendous media pressure, public pressure on the government, and the government was forced to negotiate and release 3 major terrorists. One of them was Masood Azhar. I'm sure you would have heard about him, Maulana Masood Azhar. After India released him from custody, he went back to Pakistan, and with the support of ISI and other radical groups, he founded the most notorious and dangerous terrorist organization, the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Is that clear? Masood Azhar was in an Indian jail, captured in Kashmir during counter-terror operations in 1990s. But India was forced to release him along with 2 other dreaded terrorists. They all went on to commit major acts of terrorism, and Masood Azhar founded Jaish-e-Mohammed after India released him from custody. This terror attack is just one example of how Pakistan uses other countries to cause problems for India, to wage a covert proxy war against India. Because of the open border and prevalence of organized crime, Pakistan created the local support necessary to breed terrorism against India and even to infiltrate ISI agents and terrorists into India. Is that clear? ISI intelligence operatives, they would enter India through Nepal for their subversive covert operations against India. Pakistan used the Nepal route to pump FICNs into India, fake Indian currency notes. ISI is known to carry out the economic destabilization of India. It prints fake Indian currency notes, FICNs. Right? It has procured the security paper, the ink, the printing machines needed, comes out with the exact same design as that of RBI's designs, and prints notes which look very, very authentic. Once the fake notes are printed, they are smuggled into India via Nepal. It's one of the preferred routes. The other routes for pushing FICN is Bangladesh, from Bangladeshi border to India, or from West Asian countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE. From these countries, Pakistan has pushed FICNs into India to destabilize the Indian economy and also to finance terrorism in India. In fact, these activities are connected. Organized crime, money laundering, terrorism, they are all connected. Please remember this. Wherever organized crime exists, in those areas, terrorism, insurgency will also flourish because terror financing is easily available through money laundering channels. Is that clear? You will understand more about this in internal security. We have separate chapters for this in internal security. Right? We'll study money laundering in detail, organized crime in detail, and terror financing as well. For now, just remember this connection. Organized crime is linked with money laundering and terror financing. Wherever organized crime and money laundering flourish, you will notice that in that region, terrorism and insurgency will also flourish. So Pakistan has created a base in Nepal to push its covert operations against India. It has been a major security threat, especially in 1990s and early 2000s. Have you heard of a terror group known as Indian Mujahideen or IM? Even this terror group was using Nepal as a base to move the terrorists from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan back to India. Is that clear? Indian Mujahideen was a major terror group that carried out major attacks in Indian cities from 2004 to 2011. These were radicalized Indian youth. These Indian youth who had been radicalized, they would be taken to Pakistan for terror training, for further radicalization and training. And to avoid any detection by Indian authorities, by Indian intelligence agencies, these IM terrorists would sneak out of India via the open border into Nepal. The ISI would facilitate this infiltration with the help of criminal cartels. From Nepal, the terrorists would be taken to Saudi Arabia or UAE or a West Asian country under a false identity, under fake passports, fake names. From West Asia, they would be later taken to Pakistan secretly to be trained in terror camps. And then they would be brought back to India in the same route, through the same route. Once they come back, they would commit major acts of terrorism, which was a serious threat for India between 2004 and 2011. So all these security threats have persisted along India-Nepal border, from organized crime to terrorism, infiltration, Pakistan's covert war, pushing of fake Indian currency notes. All these have been major threats for India. Even Nepal says it faces threats from India because there are many illegal gun factories that operate here in this region. Then there are several criminal gangs in UP and Bihar who also exploit this border. There are many local gun making factories. They produce these country guns, right? They are always procured by these local criminal gangs which operate in UP, Bihar, and they have a base in Nepal. So these criminal activities has been a threat for Nepal as well, right? If you've seen Mirzapur, right, you'll understand what I'm talking about. That's a very real threat. So Nepal also complains that the open border is a threat. That's why Nepal is pushing for a renegotiation of 1950 treaty. But India has decided that we shouldn't close the open border because of the security threats. Because the open border is serving a bigger purpose. It is the very foundation of the relationship. It is protecting our historical, cultural relations and close people to people relations. Because of these threats, if you close the border, if you set up border controls, then it will affect the movement of people. It will affect the movement of goods, and that will compromise Nepal's economy. And if Nepal is affected, tomorrow China will exploit that. China will create an opening to further increase its influence. So India's decision has always been the same, that there's no need to end the open border just because we have security threats. We can deal with these threats. You can improve border security. You can improve your intelligence gathering, right? You can seal the gaps in the border with better surveillance by using satellites, drones. So India is focused on border security and effective border management to deal with the threats while preserving the sanctity of the open border, which is the very foundation of this relationship. I'm sure many of you have the same doubt. Why are we still having the open border if so many threats are present? The explanation is very simple. Just because you have few problems, you don't end the arrangement itself, right? See, today you might find these topics to be difficult. Does it mean you'll quit preparing for the UPSC exam? No, right? You don't take such drastic decisions. You can always improve your preparation. You can focus more, you can revise more. That is the same logic which applies here. Because you have security problems doesn't mean you close the open border system. That is the foundation of the relationship. You close the open border, then it marks the end of the close ties between India and Nepal. Our close relations are very important to protect our security interests and strategic interests. So having an open border serves the larger purpose. It helps Nepal's economy. It gives India the influence in Nepal, right? It allows India to play a bigger role in Nepal because of the open border. That is why India has decided to protect the open border system at any cost. Security measures can be undertaken to improve border security, to deal with these threats. Got it? So this completes my discussion on all security strategic concerns. Now let's take a quick look at hydropower cooperation, and we'll discuss some projects and investments of India, which will end this chapter. Let's look at the hydropower sector. It's a very important topic because any Himalayan region, be it Uttarakhand, be it Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, Bhutan, Nepal, they all have tremendous They all have tremendous hydropower potential. Why? The answer lies in geography. You would have studied in Indian geography. You would have studied about the Himalayan mountains and the Himalayan rivers, right? Himalayan mountains are young fold mountains. They're very young in their age. They have been formed more recently because of the subduction of Indian plate under the Eurasian plate. The Himalayas are constantly rising, right? And the mountain structure is so high or so tall that you have deep valleys, which means the slopes are very deep. When you have constantly rising mountains, the Himalayas are growing constantly as we speak because of the active tectonic subduction. So the slope gradient is very deep. You have deep gorges, and this allows water to flow at a faster rate, which means water flowing here has greater potential to generate hydropower. And don't forget, the rivers here are perennial. They have water throughout the year. They are not dependent on monsoon rainfall, right? They are fed through the glaciers, the Himalayan glaciers, and the melting of snow. So these perennial rivers, which have water throughout the year, right? The river is flowing down the stream with great velocity because of gravity. Because the slopes are steep, the gradient is very steep. This is what gives tremendous hydropower potential to all the Himalayan rivers. So be it Nepal, be it Bhutan, or India's Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, they all have great potential to generate hydropower. And also hydropower is relatively clean. It is seen as a clean, renewable energy compared to other forms of energy which is produced through dirty fossil fuels. Compared to thermal power, right? Hydropower is renewable and seen as relatively cleaner. So India has made it a priority to exploit the hydropower potential of Nepal. We have taken up many projects. We have made a lot of investments. But unfortunately, most of our projects have been delayed or derailed. We haven't seen a major success despite the focus and interest. We have started many projects. India's National Hydropower Corporation and other public sector units and even few private organizations from India, they have invested in Nepal's hydropower projects. There are many projects going on. Some were proposed 50, 60 years ago. Many new projects also have been proposed. For example, during the recent visit of Prachanda in June 23, India and Nepal have signed new agreements to fast track these hydropower projects, to quickly complete these hydropower projects. But unfortunately, India has not seen much success. It's not a big success for India as of now. Many projects have been delayed for decades. Many projects have been derailed completely. There are two reasons behind this. One is the tough geography. It's not easy to build these projects in the Himalayan region, right? It requires large-scale engineering. It requires a lot of technology and a lot of investments. It's not easy to build hydropower dams in the Himalayan region, right? So the tough geography and the challenges has made it a problem. And the other challenge is the local protests that we have faced, especially against Indian projects. There have been a lot of protests on environmental and social grounds. I hope you know that hydropower projects are opposed by environmental activists as it causes ecological damage. And Himalayas has very sensitive ecology. It's already vulnerable to landslides and massive flooding. So there is strong opposition against such large hydropower projects. Plus, these hydropower dams will submerge a lot of land, which will submerge many villages as well, right? So it might create social problems. So on social and environmental grounds, there has been protests against Indian projects. All right. Along with this, there have been delays from India. There have been delays from the Indian side in arranging funds, in arranging the logistics and the technical assistance needed. So all these reasons have delayed or derailed the Indian projects. But India also believes that some of these protests might be sponsored by China. Because even if India has struggled, even though India has struggled with these projects, China has succeeded. China has seen a lot of success with similar hydropower projects. China has successfully built quite a few hydropower projects in Nepal, whereas India has struggled. So the problem lies with both the sides. On India's side, there has been a problem in funding, in executing the projects on time. There have been delays from India as well. Plus, yes, there is difficult geography and local protests, but India believes some of the protests are sponsored by China to derail Indian influence. Is that clear? So that is why India has made it a priority. The hydropower sector has become a priority area. So during the recent visit, India has reiterated its commitments. We have promised to execute and complete many projects. There are at least 8 to 10 projects we are pursuing, and we want to execute and complete them. Now, let me tell you why this is very important. India and Nepal have a power trade agreement in place. We have signed a long-term power trade agreement, which means the electricity that is produced will be exported from Nepal to India. Because India has deficit. We have an electricity deficit. And not just that, India will re-export this electricity to Bangladesh. India has created a power grid, an interconnected power grid, to link the BBIN countries. Is that clear? As a leader of the region, we have interconnected or integrated the power grids of Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. Bhutan is another major hydropower producing country. In Bhutan, the story is very different. In Bhutan, India has seen a lot of success. Unlike the failure in Nepal, India has been very successful in Bhutan. We have built multiple hydropower projects. We'll study that in the next chapter. So Bhutan is producing surplus electricity. So India takes the electricity from Bhutan and Nepal, and we export this not just to India to meet our own demand, but we re-export this to Bangladesh as well. We have interconnected the power grids of BBIN countries, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So this is a long-term priority for India, to create a common power grid where India's infrastructure will be used. Our power grids will be used. Our hydropower dams in Bhutan and Nepal will be used to produce electricity for the whole region. It's a vital project for India. So we have some mega projects like Pancheshwar Multi-Purpose Project, which was proposed in 1960s, but it has been delayed and it is still pending. The Pancheshwar Multi-Purpose Project, it is proposed to come up on the Kali River that we discussed in the disputed Kalapani region. So in this case, the border dispute has derailed the project along with environmental and social concerns. This is a joint project. All right, the idea was proposed in 60s and 70s, but still the project has not started and it's not completed. Now we are trying to give more attention and focus to complete projects like these. It's a multi-purpose project. It will not only generate hydropower, but it will also provide water for irrigation, both in India and Nepal. It will help in flood management. Is that clear? It's a multi-purpose project, one of the world's largest multi-purpose projects. The project has seen delays because of the Kala Pani border dispute, because the project is proposed on the Kali River in the disputed Kala Pani region, right on the India-Nepal border. So there are many reasons like these which have delayed India's hydropower investments. There have been local protests. India believes some of them are sponsored by China. There have been delays on India's part as well. The difficult geography has made it challenging, plus the border dispute. All these issues have delayed and derailed our projects, but going forward, we want to correct these mistakes. That's why during the recent visit, and even when Prime Minister Modi visited Nepal, he has visited Nepal at least 2-3 times in the last 10 years, in the last 8 to 9 years. And every time India has reiterated its commitment to accelerate our investments and projects in the hydropower sector. All right, the power trading arrangement is crucial for India. It will allow India to have influence across the region in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, as India would be the common link, creating a common power grid. It will solve the energy problem. It will provide for better development and economic activities. So it's a priority for India. Plus, it will increase our influence as well in Nepal, as it will benefit Nepal also. So the hydropower sector is very, very important in this relationship. Is that clear? Next, I use the term BBIN, correct? This term actually refers to, this acronym, it actually refers to a connectivity project. BBIN is not usually used in the context of power cooperation. All right, I just use the same short form, but the term BBIN is used to refer to a connectivity project that includes a motor vehicles agreement. To connect the BBIN countries, to basically use the roads of these 4 countries, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, to provide for free movement of trucks to transport goods between these 4 countries. This is an Indian initiative. All right. India has ambitious plans for connectivity in the region. In fact, we had proposed this project as part of the SAARC grouping, as part of the regional organization, that is SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. We wanted to interconnect the road networks of all the SAARC nations and sign motor vehicle agreements so that we can promote free movement of goods carrying trucks to improve trade and economic activities. It's not a new highway. Please understand this. BBIN, right? This motor vehicles agreement, which India proposed, it's not a new road. It's not a new highway entirely. It's about connecting the existing roads and relaxing the border controls, which will provide for free movement of trucks, which will improve the transportation of goods. Right? So we proposed this at the SAARC grouping. We wanted to improve regional economic integration. But unfortunately, Pakistan has always derailed Indian initiatives at SAARC. Pakistan is a key member of SAARC. It has always blocked Indian projects and initiatives at the SAARC grouping. So India was frustrated with Pakistan's obstruction. So what India did was, we took this project away from SAARC and proposed a sub-regional initiative. We excluded Pakistan. We took the initiative out of SAARC itself and instead proposed a sub-regional initiative known as BBIN. The idea was to interconnect the roads of Nepal, Bhutan, India, and Bangladesh and sign a motor vehicles agreement so that the 4 countries can be connected to provide free movement of trucks which can carry goods. This project would primarily help Nepal and Bhutan as they are landlocked. It would enable both Nepal and Bhutan to access the seaports of India and Bangladesh. Once implemented, trucks from Nepal, goods from Bhutan can directly reach important ports in Bay of Bengal like Kolkata, Paradip and Vishakhapatnam, Chittagong, Mongla. They are major ports in Bangladesh. So Nepal and Bhutan would get port access or sea access, which is vital for them as they are landlocked countries in the Himalayan belt. This was the idea of India, right? Since Pakistan was creating problems at SARC, we took this initiative away from SARC and proposed a sub-regional initiative to connect these four countries at least. All right? All the four countries were very excited. Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh were very interested. But unfortunately, Bhutan backed out at the last minute. Please make a note. Bhutan's government was very interested in the idea. But later, due to some internal reasons, Bhutan had to quit the project. It stayed out of the BBIN initiative. I'll not explain the reason now. I'll explain this in the next chapter. When we come to India, Bhutan, there I will explain why Bhutan quit BBIN, why it did not join the BBIN initiative. Bhutan's government was interested initially, but due to some internal reason, Bhutan has decided not to join BBIN. So as of now, the other three countries are going ahead. Bangladesh, India, Nepal. They have gone ahead with the initiative. They have signed the motor vehicles agreement. They are trying to connect their roads and they are looking to establish a corridor through which trucks can move between these three countries carrying goods, and it will give Nepal sea access to the ports in India and Bangladesh. All right, but the door is always open for Bhutan. India has kept the door open. In the future, if Bhutan decides to come back, it's more than welcome. Got it? But we haven't forced Bhutan to join. We respect Bhutan's sovereignty and its decision. So India has not forced Bhutan to join, but the door is always open for Bhutan to come back. So it's still referred to as BBIN project, but it does not include Bhutan. It includes only India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. They have signed the motor vehicles agreement and they are in the process of connecting the roads and opening up the borders for free movement of trucks that can improve trade in the region. So it's a very important infrastructure and connectivity project. All right. Now let me give you an idea about the development assistance that India has given to Nepal. What kind of investments has India made? What kind of projects have we funded? This is also very important for your understanding. See, when a country like India provides loans and aid to another country, when we invest in another country, this collectively is known as development assistance. When a large country provides investments, loans, funds, and grants to another country, to a small country, to invest in infrastructure projects and developmental projects, this assistance, economic and technical assistance, is officially known as development assistance. That is the technical word. All right. In fact, in the Ministry of External Affairs, there is a dedicated office called Office of Development Assistance that looks after all the Indian investments and projects in other countries. To track Indian investments and projects in other countries and to execute them as promised, there is a dedicated office for development assistance within the Ministry of External Affairs. All right, so remember the term development assistance. It's a technical word. It refers to all the assistance we are giving through investments, loans, funds, and technical assistance to other countries to build projects, to execute infrastructure projects. Got it? So in Nepal, India has always been a partner. It has always been a development partner. From 1950s till now, India has invested in many big projects. We have built many key infrastructure projects of Nepal. For example, the Tribhuvan International Airport was built by India. Many important road, rail projects, power grids, bridges, even mobile and internet connectivity has been executed by India and Indian companies. Is that clear? We have invested in Nepal's healthcare, education, water management, rural development. We have built schools and colleges, community training centers. We have built hospitals. We have supplied medicines and vaccines. For example, during the recent COVID-19 pandemic, right? Nepal couldn't deal with it on its own. India supplied essential medicines, drugs, PPE kits, oxygen, and even vaccines as part of our vaccine diplomacy. We have helped in rural development projects. We have developed a lot of border infrastructure, especially to connect the Terai region with UP and Bihar, where there is a greater need for transportation. Is that clear? Cross-border rail links have been developed. Even during the recent visit of Nepal's Prime Minister, many new projects have been announced. Both India and Nepal are working to complete some road, railway, and bridge projects that will further connect India and Nepal. We have assisted Nepal's army in training and in supplying weapons to them. We even have a joint military exercise known as Surya Kiran. Remember the names of important military exercises, could be important for your prelims. Surya Kiran is a military exercise between the two armies, Indian Army and Nepal's army. They conduct a joint military exercise which focuses on counter-terrorism as well. It's called Surya Kiran. We have also provided a line of credit of more than $1 billion. Got it? That is the kind of assistance India has given. What is line of credit? Line of credit is a concessional loan. It is a concessional loan that is provided by India. We call it line of credit. Let me tell you how it works. Now, let's say we have announced $1 billion line of credit for Nepal. All right? It is a concessional loan. It comes with an extended period for repayment. Interest rates are very low. So, the loan does not become a burden on the borrowing country. It will have an extended repayment schedule, and the interest rates are nominal. Interest rates are very, very low. It is similar to the concessional loans that we borrow from Japan. India also borrows similar low interest concessional loans from Japan for funding projects in India. So we provide such concessional loans called line of credit to many countries, to Afghanistan, to Sri Lanka, Maldives, many African countries, many island countries in the Pacific, South American countries, our neighbors. They all receive line of credit from India. This is a ready facility available. That is $1 billion will be readily available for them. All right. The best part is that they can withdraw only the amount they want and pay interest on what they have withdrawn. It's very flexible. That's what you should remember. It's a flexible loan. The prepayment period is extended for many years, right? The interest rate is nominal, so it never becomes a burden on the borrowing country. And the terms are very flexible. Now, Nepal need not utilize all the $1 billion, right? Let's say Nepal only wants 400 million. Nepal can withdraw only that amount and it will pay interest only on that withdrawn amount, not on the entire 1 billion. Got it? That is how it is flexible for the small, poor, and developing countries. Now, I'm sure all of you have the same question. How does this benefit India? We ourselves are struggling with financial resources. Why are we giving loans and donations to others? Right? Many of you will have that question. Please understand that these are strategic investments that we are making in our foreign policy. Every year in our budget, a certain amount is set aside for development assistance. It is crucial to provide such funding and investments through concessional loans, maybe sometimes through aid and grants as well, to gain influence. This is soft power diplomacy. This is how you gain influence in other countries, create goodwill, and also gain leverage and influence by executing critical projects. If Indian companies build and execute major roads and railway projects and airports and seaports, Indian companies will control them as well, giving Indian government leverage on these projects, exercising our strategic influence and ensuring that those countries remain close and friendly to India. That is a way of ensuring and protecting your strategic and economic interests. Is that clear? So it's not charity that India is doing. Sometimes we do provide grants and donations and aid, right, which need not be repaid. That is during distress and disasters. But investments that we make, it's a concessional loan which has to be repaid. Whatever amount they borrow, they have to repay the loan with nominal interest rate. So how does it benefit India? India can choose where the investment will go. We can tell Nepal that this line of credit is for infrastructure projects. They can invest only in certain projects which are selected by India. Now we want hydropower projects. We want a strategic road. We want an important airport to be built. So we can tell those countries that the loan we are giving is only for these projects, the projects we want, right? Projects which will benefit both. We are never one-sided in our relationship. We always look for mutual benefit. It will help the other country as well. It will help India as well. So in a way, we can choose the sector and the kind of projects we want by mutually negotiating and discussing so that it will benefit both the countries. We can also make a condition that the project will be built and executed by an Indian company. This can be made a condition. Since we are giving the loan, we can make a condition that project should be given to an Indian company, which means the money comes back. Whatever you're investing will come back. The loan will be repaid and the project will be executed by an Indian company in most of the cases. So that way, you're not losing money. Rather, the money comes back with interest and you're making long-term strategic investments. You are executing key projects to drive economic growth, to improve connectivity, and also to gain strategic influence to protect your national interests. That is how you compete with China and big powers like US and other countries, right? So this is not a waste of money. Got it? These are strategic investments we make through our foreign policy to help poor countries, underdeveloped countries, and developing countries. We call it development assistance. So it repays India. We can choose the sectors and projects. We can place conditions that the project should be given to Indian companies, and we give flexibility for them so that the loan never becomes a burden for the borrowing countries. It will mutually benefit both the partners, and it will improve economic activities. It will improve connectivity. It will improve overall development and welfare, and it will increase our influence, our goodwill. So this is a form of soft power diplomacy that we engage in. Got it? And Nepal is one of the biggest recipients of India's development assistance. Look at this table. I've taken it from the economic survey. Almost every year in our budget, the biggest allocation is made to Bhutan and then Nepal. These are the two biggest beneficiaries of India's development assistance. Bhutan gets the biggest allocation in our foreign policy. More than 1,500 crores almost consistently is given to Bhutan every single year. All right. Nepal is the second biggest beneficiary, followed by other major countries in the region like Seychelles, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Maldives, Myanmar, and many others. So remember the top two beneficiaries. Bhutan and Nepal are always in the top two. Bhutan at first, Nepal at second, followed by other friendly countries. So in our budget, which is assigned for MEA, there is a separate allocation made every year for development assistance. That is to drive our investments, to provide line of credit, to provide donations and aid when a country is affected by disasters or if it is in distress. A dedicated allocation is made in the budget within our resources. We are not shooting beyond our capacity. We are not draining our wealth. Within our resources, whatever is possible, right? Small part of it is set aside. And this is distributed to different countries so that we execute key projects, bring our relations closer, protect our interests, and grow our influence. Is that clear? Now, in Nepal, we are in direct competition with China. Please don't forget, China is already miles ahead of India. It's executing the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road project. Nepal has already joined Belt and Road Initiative. China has made bigger investments than India, from roads to railway lines. It is bringing roads and railway lines from Tibet across the border into Nepal, right next to Indian border near UP and Bihar. This is a major concern for India. What if a war breaks out between India and China uses road and railway network in Nepal to bring Chinese troops from Tibet right next to India's borders with Nepal? This is a major security and strategic concern. China is building pipelines. It has even taken part in the mobile internet infrastructure of Nepal. And this is a cyber threat for India because our networks are deeply connected with Nepal's networks. Our mobile internet infrastructure is closely connected with Nepal's mobile and internet infrastructure. Our fear is that China might hack into our networks via Nepal's networks. So China has executed many such large projects. It has successfully carried out few hydropower projects, whereas India has struggled. And it has even offered alternate port access to reduce Nepal's dependency on Indian ports. Since Nepal is dependent on Indian ports for trading with rest of the world, China is trying to give alternatives. It's made an offer that Nepal can access Chinese ports located in eastern China, that is Shanghai and few other eastern ports, right, where China has large infrastructure present. Those facilities have been given. They've been made open to Nepal. But since the route is not viable, it's a very long route. It will be very expensive to transport goods from Nepal to Chinese ports. So Nepal hasn't taken it up, but China has tried replacing India. It has tried giving alternate port access, so Nepal need not be dependent just on India for port access. So this is what China is doing. So India has to compete. We have to counter Chinese influence. Even in the cultural domain, China has funded the Mandarin language in Nepal's schools. Mandarin language has been widely promoted. Chinese cultural influences are being promoted. China is trying to develop Lumbini, which is a major Buddhist pilgrimage site. India wanted to develop Lumbini. We have a major cultural initiative, which I'll explain very soon. So China took over the Lumbini project. And as I told you yesterday, Lumbini is crucial in Buddhism. It's the birthplace of Lord Gautam Buddha. Right? Ideally, India should have developed this, as India is the birthplace of Buddhism. India, Nepal should have jointly developed it. But China managed to take over the Lumbini makeover project, and it has tried reviving the Buddhist pilgrimage site. It has funded Mandarin in Nepali schools, promoting Chinese cultural influence. We call them influence operations. These are soft power influence operations based on culture. China has become a specialist country in running such influence operations around the world to gain cultural influence, soft power influence. Right? So India can't be behind. China has even supplied weapons to Nepal. It has become a major weapon supplier. They even have a major military exercise. Does anyone know the name of the military exercise between China and Nepal? Can you mention that in the comments? Does anyone know the military exercise between China and Nepal? What is the name? No one? It is called the Sagar Mata. Sagar Mata is the name of the joint exercise between China and Nepal. Is that clear? So if China is exerting its influence, obviously India will have to counter that. That is why we make these large investments. In the cultural domain, India has a major initiative, that is the Buddhist Circuit Initiative and the Ramayana Circuit Initiative. Since India and Nepal are home to several Hindu and Buddhist pilgrimage sites, we are trying to revive tourist infrastructure at these important pilgrimage sites. This is part of our Buddhist diplomacy, cultural diplomacy. See, Buddhism, which took root in India, in the Indian subcontinent, it spread across Asia. There are many countries in Asia and the world where Buddhism is widely popular. It's a majority religion in many countries. For example, you have Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, even China, South Korea, Japan, then Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, then Singapore. Across these Asian countries, Buddhism is widely popular even today. So we want to engage with these countries. We want to project our soft power influence, our cultural influence, by reviving the Buddhist pilgrimage sites in India and Nepal. There are many important sites connected with the life of Lord Buddha. Lumbini was the birthplace. Bodh Gaya was where Lord Buddha attained enlightenment. You have other major places like Sarnath, Kushinagar, etc. All these Buddhist pilgrimage sites are being revived. The tourist infrastructure is being revived. Better hotels are being provided, better facilities, better amenities for tourists, right? We have built airports as well. A new international airport came up at Kushinagar in UP, right? So that we can attract foreign tourists, Buddhists from other countries, to drive our soft power diplomacy. So Buddhist Circuit Initiative is not just for Nepal. It's for all the countries where Buddhism is popular, especially Asian countries. Similarly, we have the Ramayana Initiative, the Ramayana Circuit Initiative. There are many Hindu pilgrimage sites associated with Ramayana in India and Nepal and in Sri Lanka as well. We are trying to connect all these sites with better transportation, better tourist facilities to project our cultural influence and extend our soft power. Got it? So this is how India is engaging in Nepal, not just to maintain good relations, but to counter China as well. So on this note, I conclude my discussion of this chapter. It's a big chapter, but trust me, it's a very, very important topic. So as part of the conclusion, I have added some points as a way forward. I expect you to go through this as an exercise. I've included some expert opinions from popular strategic experts and authors like Rajiv Sikri, Raja Mohan, Brahmacharani, and the others. This is basically their opinion about India-Nepal relations, the strength of India-Nepal relations, where India has gone wrong. It's all based on what we have discussed. I want you guys to go through these expert opinions. It gives you a way forward and a conclusion. And it gives you an idea on how you can end your answers in your mains exam. All right? So please go through this. Take it as a small exercise from my side. I expect all of you to go through these points once and make some notes out of this. So this completes my detailed discussion of India, Nepal, and all other related topics. Let's quickly look at some questions and we'll end the session very soon. Bal Raju is asking why we give more percentage of assistance to Bhutan. I'll explain that tomorrow because that is the next chapter, right? So there you'll understand why Bhutan needs more economic assistance from India. I'll give the reason, don't worry. It's part of India-Bhutan relations. Soft loans and line of credit is the same. Saurabh is asking. Yes. Line of credit refers to a concessional loan or a soft loan. They're both the same. Anushka is asking, sir, should we remember all the projects? See, in Nepal, we have many small projects going on, many hydro projects, road and rail projects. You don't have to remember all those names, not necessary. If the projects are important, I'll mention the name, like Pancheshwar Multipurpose Project, BBIN project. They are important, right? There you have to remember the names, the place where it's coming up, the alignment, but the rest of it, they're not relevant. That's why I didn't mention those names. So I'll do the same in every chapter. The big important projects, I'll mention them, we'll discuss them. The minor ones, you can leave them. You don't have to sit and mug up all the projects. Mithun is asking, what are the concerns in fast tracking infrastructure projects in other countries? The biggest concern is arranging the funds, in distributing the funds on time, in executing them on time. Because we face many technical challenges when you're building large projects like a seaport or an airport or a highway, right? So providing funds on time and executing them on time with the right technical support is the challenge we are facing. Tina is asking why Siliguri was chosen as a location for constructing a new pipeline to Nepal, considering that it can be misused by Nepal's government, which is close to China. See, Siliguri corridor is a choke point and a vital strategic point for India. Yes, we do have concerns regarding Nepal misusing it, but we should strengthen our infrastructure and presence near Siliguri. That is how you protect your core interests near the Siliguri corridor, right? So it explains why India focuses and executes such critical projects in Siliguri corridor. Okay, all right. So these were the questions. Don't worry, we'll meet again tomorrow. Any further doubts, let me know. I'll be more than happy to take them. So let's meet again tomorrow at 5 p.m. We'll start with the next topic, that is India's relations with Bhutan. That is it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.